I was working as a waiter at Waffle House, choosing to work the third shift because I had the best hourly pay and brought in pretty good tips due to us being the only 24/7 diner in the entire town. It took me about a year to save up enough money to rent a place in the city and get out of the middle of nowhere, but in that time, I saw quite a few things that still stick with me to this day. By and large, most of the customers I had were truckers and other random people traveling on the interstate through the middle of the night. The town was just a stopover point, not a destination. The so-called locals consisted of farmers and ranchers from the surrounding area, and anyone else like me worked in the fast food and hotel chains clustered around the interstate exit. The final and yet most characteristic residents of that depressing cesspit of a town were the vagrants, hitchhikers, tweakers, and destitute opportunists that had been stranded with us. They could be stuck there from anywhere to a few days to several years, clinging to the parking lots and awnings that were the only meager shelter for dozens of miles in any direction, panhandling for whatever they could until they got lucky enough to get a ride to somewhere else. Really, the only stressful part of my job was dealing with these people. In the beginning, I tried to be empathetic. After all, they are human. However, it didn't take long to end up like my usual coworker, the cook who had been there for 10 years and had seen just about everything. His name was Tony, and the only thing separating him from them was a steady position at the grill. Nobody ever got a chair thrown at them, as far as I know, but Tony was prone to throwing turners and other utensils at anyone who got on his bad side. I usually followed his lead based on his body language. He knew who was trouble and who wasn't. However, even with Tony as a reliable backup, things sometimes got out of hand. There was this one night that I'll never forget. I don't remember what day of the week it was, but all I know was that it had been unusually slow that night. It was around 3 a.m. when this guy walked in, and even I knew something was not right about him. He was wearing soiled clothes and a completely torn-up jacket, covered head to toe in dust, and he was in a completely panicked state of mind. The weird thing was that he said nothing as he ran past us, clutching his right arm to his chest, and immediately locking himself in the bathroom. Tony and I rolled our eyes at the same time, thinking, here we go again. Although I think we both had a feeling this wasn't a regular hobo bathroom emergency or a tweaker looking for a private place to do their thing. That's when I asked Tony, doesn't he kind of look familiar? He brushed it off at first, but then after a short conversation, we realized that he had been inside about 2 hours ago, desperately asking all the customers for rides until eventually, we had to kick him out for being a disturbance. It seemed he obviously hadn't had any luck getting a ride, but something else had happened to him too. I became worried. If that guy needed help, it would be a while before an ambulance could get to him and even longer for them to take him to a hospital. Tony told me to take care of it, so I ran to check on the only customer we had in the store at the time and got them on their way. When I took the bathroom keys and went to check on our stranger in distress, I knocked on the door pretty loud. I asked if everything was okay. There was a pause, then finally a distraught voice answered me, I think I'm really hurt. I just need a ride. Suddenly, I knew something was seriously wrong. The sound of his voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I fumbled with the key ring as I told him I was about to open the door. Sir, if you need help, I have to come in there. I shouted. No. The stranger screamed. You have to come get me. I stopped for a second, confused, but then I snapped out of it and shoved the key in the lock. I turned it and opened the door to a terrifying sight. The bathroom was empty, completely empty. No injured man, no blood, no dust, just nothing. It was as clean as it had been since I last cleaned it, as if nobody had been in there at all. In fact, it even looked cleaner than that. What's going on in there? Tony shouted from the kitchen. I was just at a loss. I let the bathroom door close and stepped back. I looked at Tony and told him the truth. There's nobody in there, I said. Don't give me that. Tony shouted. See for yourself. I told him, and he did. He stormed over and barged through the bathroom door. I saw him go blank, just like I did when he saw the impossible absence of a person. He turned around and looked inside the women's room too, but again, nothing. Nobody in there. In raw disbelief, we gathered ourselves behind the counter. We interrogated each other uselessly, thinking one of us must have let him slip by unnoticed. However, we both knew we had been on high alert since the second he came in. There was no way either of us would have missed him leaving within a fraction of a second. Our conversation ended abruptly when we both saw the same thing out of the corner of our eyes. The stranger was somehow outside, looking at us through the window. He still had his right arm stuffed out of sight, but now, as we got a better view of his face, we saw that wasn't his only problem. His face was bloody, like he'd been hit with a brick. His nose was broken, his lip was split and missing a piece, showing us his cracked and missing teeth. One of his eyes seemed completely swollen over, but the one that was open was gushing blood. Tony and I didn't move a muscle. We didn't even breathe for a second. After a few horrible seconds of realizing what was happening, I finally thought to call 911. But as soon as the idea occurred to me, the man started to move. He turned to the side and started to limp across the big front window. We watched him in silence as he made it all the way to the corner of the window, where it wrapped around to the other side. What the hell? I whispered, only for Tony to quickly shush me. It was at that moment I saw he had gone pale and wide-eyed, which only terrified me even more. Something about this man had gotten through Tony's defenses, and that meant we were not prepared. Before we could say anything else, we heard a crash from the back room. We both ran inside and searched for the source of the noise. It was coming from the walk-in freezer. Somebody was tearing things up and freaking out. Tony ran up there and threw open the door, and there he was, the guy. He had ripped open a box of burger patties and was clutching a handful of meat, pressing it to his right arm like an ice pack. When he saw us, he froze. The patties dropped from his hand and revealed the condition of his arm. His hand was stuck in a thumbs-up position, but his wrist had been snapped clean off, and his hand was dangling from the rest of his arm by a thread of skin. After a terrifying moment of deer-in-headlight stares, the stranger bolted from the freezer, crashing through both me and Tony. He sprinted outside, screaming, before we had a chance to react. I stumbled to my feet as Tony ran out to the dining area, locked the front doors, and switched off all the lights. Then he pushed me back into the back room and started yelling at me. "How could you leave the back door unlocked?" he yelled. "No, look. It's still locked." I pointed to the back door, and sure enough, it was locked now. Absolutely nothing was making sense, but we gave up on trying to decipher it for the rest of the night until the sun came up and the morning crew came in. We kept the doors locked and stayed out of sight. When we were finally freed from our nightmare of a shift and set out into the world, we noticed the train of police and paramedics on the freeway right outside of town. We asked around only to find out that a man had been killed in a hit-and-run right there at the off-ramp not even 1,000 feet from the Waffle House. He died sometime after midnight, but his body lay on the shoulder undiscovered until daylight. His corpse was mangled, but his thumb was still sticking straight up from trying to hitch a ride. Of course, by the afternoon, they had scraped him off the pavement and washed away his blood until the spot where he died was cleaner than I'd ever seen it. My friend Michael was throwing a house party. I arrived early to help set things up. I secured a spot to sleep in his parents' room, meaning I could drive to the party and drink without having to worry about driving home. His parents obviously weren't home for the night. Most of our close friends in our friend group came, plus a bunch of Michael's friends who I didn't know. The party was fun. At midnight, everyone screamed "Happy New Year" and cheered their drinks. After that, people slowly started circulating out, and the party started to quiet down as people went to either other parties, bars, or home. The later the night got, the more it became just the closer friends staying behind, until it just turned into a chill drinking session in the living room. This went on late into the night. It was likely 2:40 a.m. when the last of everyone who wasn't sleeping at Michael's house was gone. As it quieted down, we started hearing this occasional sound. At first, we didn't know what it was, but it soon started to sound like a creaking sound. It was dismissed as a sound from the fridge or something at first, which I know sounds stupid, but house appliances often make weird noises. It was just Michael, me, and Lloyd. Lloyd was falling asleep on the couch already. It was reaching that time where we were just going to go to sleep. However, eventually, we got so bothered by the noise that we had to search. We went to the kitchen, and it wasn't coming from in there. We realized when we were close to the basement door that it was coming from downstairs. Michael opened the door, and we heard this creaking sound. "Go check what it is," I said. He kept saying, "No way." Then he called down into the basement, "Yo, who's down there?" The creaking stopped, and we never heard it again. After a solid minute of waiting at the top of the stairs, we agreed to go down together. We both grabbed knives, drunkenly thinking that was a good idea, when in reality, we were so drunk we'd probably only hurt ourselves with them. We got to the bottom of the stairs and looked through the entire basement. It's not huge, it just has a couch, TV, a bar, a table in the corner, and various old pieces of junk. It was pretty messy at the time. The first thing we did was search any possible crevice for someone who could be hiding. Then we tried to figure out what could have been making that sound. I noticed a rocking chair, and so I went up to it, sat in it, and then started rocking in it. It made the exact same creaking sound we had been hearing. Michael and I looked at each other. I stood up, and so did every hair on my body. I don't think we ever ran faster than we did when we ran up those stairs and slammed the door shut. We tried to come up with any logical explanation, but there was none. He kept the basement door locked for days until his parents came back. There was no living soul down there, but something was moving that rocking chair. That rocking chair used to belong to his grandma, who passed away forever ago, and it's just something his mom held on to for sentimental reasons. I can't say I've ever experienced anything resembling the paranormal before this, nor since then. It still sends chills down my spine. Way back when I was a teenager, my friend's house was broken into. My mom was out of town, and I was at my friend Acer's house. We lived in a middle-class to upper-class neighborhood in the suburbs. Nothing super fancy, just a pretty average American home. All the houses looked similar in design, and they all had the same cookie-cutter, average-sized yard. Friend Acer lived right down the street, and I wanted to hang out over there and sleep over because I didn't like to stay home alone at night, and my mom wasn't really sure if I was ready for it yet either. Quite frankly, I was 11 years old, and I was a pretty shy and timid kid that was always sucked into the Xbox. I didn't play sports, and my dad wasn't in the picture very much. I was kind of a mama's boy, as embarrassing as that is to admit, but it's the truth. I was scared to stay home alone for a whole night. It was okay, though, because Acer's parents let me sleep over. Acer's parents, Beck and Irina, were really cool. It was a Saturday night, and they were also having company over. They were grilling out and having some drinks by the fire while Acer and I and a few of his younger cousins ran around the yard, playing catch, jumping on the trampoline, and swimming in their pool. After a few hours of being kids and bouncing off the walls, we grew tired, so we hung out inside for a bit. Then eventually, we made our way outside for an hour or so to hang out with the adults until our curfew came up. I would say around 11 o'clock, his parents made us go inside to get ready for bed. They put a movie on for all of us kids in the basement, and we set up a bunch of sleeping bags. We were watching some random movie, I don't remember what it was, but after a while, I fell asleep. I'm a light sleeper, so it wasn't a surprise when I woke up to one of the doors creeping open in the basement, along with some heavy footsteps, which sounded like they were coming from the stairs. I lifted my head up to see what was going on, but I couldn't see much. It was really dark down there, and I figured it was one of Acer's little cousins maybe just using the restroom or something, so I laid back down. I rolled over and went back to sleep, but within a matter of minutes, I woke to a pounding sound. I couldn't tell what the banging noise was, but I could tell it was coming from behind us, towards the stairs. Acer's basement was a decent size, and we were in the living room part of it, but on the other side, there was a bar and like 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. I thought the noise was coming from downstairs, but I wasn't totally sure. I thought that it might have been one of the adults and that maybe they were just grabbing something from downstairs, so I tried to close my eyes again. It was really dark down there, and I didn't expect it to be a stranger either. That, or I thought that maybe one of the adults went to the restroom as well. I didn't have a phone, so I couldn't check the time or get a hold of anyone. I wasn't really sure I needed to anyways. I sat and listened for a while, though, and I couldn't hear the adults outside partying anymore. Maybe they were done for the night and coming in to check on us, I thought. You remember when you were a kid and thought there were monsters under your bed or in the closet? That fear you would feel, but deep down, you knew there was nothing to be scared about because you knew it wasn't real. Kind of felt like that. I went back to sleep one more time, but this time, what happened was far more disturbing than the previous times I'd been woken up. I woke up to a man on top of me, shaking me and trying to grab me. Other kids and Acer all ran to get the adults for help. I put up a fight, but eventually, the strange man grabbed me full on and started to run. I was being kidnapped. I did everything I could to try to get away, kicking, biting, scratching, and I even tried to dig my fingers through the man's eyes, but nothing was working. I was hopeless. That is, until Acer's dad chased him down and hit him in the head with a fire extinguisher. We both fell straight to the ground on the sidewalk, and I hit my head on the cement. Somehow, the man managed to stand up and run away, and since he had a mask on, we had no way of identifying him. I wonder if things would have ended differently had the other adults been there still. Maybe they would have chased the man down and beat his ass, and he would have got arrested, and I could actually sleep at night. But for the longest of times, I couldn't sleep. The same nightmare came to me over and would replay in my head. We think that the man let himself inside through the sliding glass door in the basement. I wonder how long he was standing there, planning the attack. If I would have listened to my gut, maybe things would have turned out differently, but I actually ended up with a concussion anyway. Nothing too severe, but still a concussion. Ever since that day, no matter what it is, I always listen to my intuition, and I suggest you do the same. It's always better to be safe than sorry, believe me. I'm also really glad that Acer's parents were still awake, or maybe I would have been murdered or kidnapped or even worse. The following pictures you're about to see were taken by hikers Orly and Dante, who both live in Eagle Mountain, Utah, a small town south of Salt Lake City. For the past few years, they had been exploring forests in search of interesting things, and one day they found it. One day, Orly was hiking in Cedar Fort, just 5 miles south of Salt Lake City. While hiking, she found large amounts of animal bones and piles of junk people had dumped, but things started to get strange when she started coming across strange symbols and animal parts scattered throughout the forest, some of them in weird formations. On September 15th, she decided to bring her friend Dante along with her to show him in person the unusual things she was finding. This time, the two came across something even more disturbing. On the trail, there was a severed deer head and a pentagram surrounded by deer legs, which were not there the first time Orly walked the trail. The sun was going down, and after getting their pictures, they agreed it was time to head back to the car. But the more they walked, they realized they didn't recognize the path they were on. So, the two started looking around for anything that could refresh their memory of where they were. But as it got dark out, the two accepted that they were lost. With nothing but their phone flashlights to navigate, they started getting the feeling they were being watched. As they picked up their pace, the two started to hear the trees and bushes moving at least 20 feet to their right, made more concerning by the fact that there was no wind that night. The two started to panic and hurried onto a trail they found, hoping it would take them back to Orly's car. Just when things couldn't seem to get any worse, Orly and Dante heard a scream so deep and horrific that it sounded neither human nor animal. The two sprinted down the trail, Orly making a conscious effort not to look back, but Dante did. Dante claimed to see a large black figure on the trail behind them, too big to be a human. The two made it to the car by some stroke of luck, losing whatever was chasing them. So, they left the forest and went straight home. Orly has not returned since. I was 18 when my parents went away on a week-long anniversary trip. My sister had already moved out by this point, so I had to hold the fort. My parents' property is enclosed by woods and a dirt driveway leading to the road. The road is a quiet back road with equally sized properties running alongside it, all of them separated at a decent distance. So it's a really isolated feel up there. Everyone in town knows each other, you see familiar faces all the time, for the most part, at the gas station, the grocery store, the bars, which I'd learn a few years later when I started going to them. Speaking of gas stations, this story starts one day while my parents were away. I was at a gas station filling up my tank when a black Jeep Cherokee pulled up to the pump next to mine. A man with a goatee stepped out, greeted me, and started filling his tank. In that town, it was normal for strangers to greet each other like that. He had his nozzle locked into the gas tank, and then he walked around to my side of the pump and went, "Excuse me, do you know how to get to the interstate from here?" I helped him to the best of my ability. He pulled out a notepad and started writing down the directions I gave him. Very odd how he wouldn't just do that on his cell phone like anyone else would. He thanked me and asked if I'm from the area. I said yeah, I grew up here, and he said he's from out of town. He didn't specify where. He then went back to his side and put the nozzle back in the pump. He then asked my name as he said, "It's nice meeting you." I said, "My name's Aaron." He said, "What a lovely name," and then got in his car. As I got into mine, I drove out first and turned left to go up the road back home. It was only a few minutes worth of driving before I was approaching our turn into the driveway. I slowed down, put my blinker on, and then turned right onto the property. It was at that moment that I noticed the car behind me was that same black Jeep Cherokee. He passed me as I turned into our driveway. He went the complete opposite way that I told him to go to get to the interstate. As he passed me, he didn't slow down or anything, so it seemed that maybe he just forgot the directions I gave him and went the wrong way. I let myself inside and went about the rest of my day doing whatever. I think it was that night that I was going out to meet up with my friends. I stepped outside, walked to my car, and heard the sound of footsteps nearby. Like I said, the house is enclosed by woods, and this was in the middle of the summertime. It could have been any number of animals, so I didn't investigate. I just got in my car and left. But when I got back home hours later and walked from my car to the house, a man's voice from out somewhere in the woods called out, "Aaron." I got the chills as I looked around and then, in a panic, rushed to open the front door. I slammed it shut and sat on the couch to breathe. The neighbors all knew my name, but the houses are not on top of each other, so it's a bit of a walk, and there was no reason for one of them to call my name like that, like a creep, and not identify themselves. I decided to call my parents to tell them, and their explanation was it must have been one of the neighbors and they'll probably knock on the door. I didn't tell them about the encounter at the gas station. The next day, which was a Saturday, I stayed home most of the day. Later that night, I once again was going out to meet with my friends. After getting ready and everything, I went outside, and as I was walking to my car, I heard loud and clear from the not-so-far distance, someone call, "Aaron." Again, this time I didn't wait a second. I ran back inside the house and locked the door. Again, I called 911, this time texting my family while doing so. After 2 cops showed up to the house, they looked around the perimeter of the property with their flashlights, then came back and said to call again if this persisted. I didn't feel much better after this. It's not really like they did much. Going outside until the next day when I had work, I was a server at a nearby restaurant. I was working a late shift. I left the house in broad daylight, paranoid to hear that voice again. Thankfully, though, I didn't. Maybe seeing the police car finally scared them off. After many hours at work, I was ready to go home and collapse into bed. I pulled onto the property, parked my car out front, and walked to the front door. I stopped when I heard the sound of footsteps again. It didn't sound like an animal's footsteps, though. I stood on the front deck for a second, waiting, and then that familiar voice yelled out again, saying, "Aaron, don't call the cops on me again." "Cutie," I yelled out, "you need help, you're sick," and let myself inside. I called the cops once more, and the cops came again, searched the perimeter again, and left. My parents told me I should stay at a friend's house for the night. I couldn't agree more. They would be back the following night, so after that, I would feel much safer being there. My friend Fidelia told me I could stay with her that night, so I packed a bag and was ready to go. I checked out the windows first to make sure the coast was clear. I then went outside and locked the door as fast as I could, then ran to the car. As I turned the key in the ignition, I heard something right to my left. Right outside the driver's side door was a man wearing a face mask trying to open the door. I couldn't even scream. I felt like I was choking on air. As I put the car in drive, he started hitting the glass with his elbow. I looped my car around on the grass and sped down the driveway, and I turned right up the road and didn't stop until I got to Fidelia's house. I was hysterically crying the whole drive there, as I had Fidelia and her dad on the phone with me. He said he would have come and picked me up had he known the situation. We called the police together for a 3rd time in total. A couple officers went to my parents' house to investigate again, make sure no windows were shattered or anything. One officer came to Fidelia's house, where I once again gave my description of what happened. This was probably the most action these cops had seen in a long time in this quiet town. Thankfully, my parents came home the next day, and I felt safe staying at home again. I fully believe the man at the gas station followed me home intentionally and scoped the place out, realizing I was by myself and, for whatever reason, toyed with me until he actually tried to pounce and get me. I shouldn't have given my real name, and I should have been more alert to my surroundings and realized he was following me in my car that day. Some people are nuts and have way too much time on their hands. This incident was a huge motivating factor in my moving out to my own apartment a few months later. We were hitchhiking through Europe, my then boyfriend and I, and on our way back home, a truck driver picked us up. We had had a few weird encounters on our trip before, but we had been on the road for about a month, and nothing really scary happened until we met this guy. He was a young guy, about 25, quite regular, spoke English okay, and had been away from home for a long time. I was a bit younger, with my boyfriend being around his age. My boyfriend was tired, so he took a seat on the bed in the truck and wasn't really trying to hold a conversation. During our trip, we switched turns as I usually do when I hitchhike with someone. One person talks with the driver, and the other relaxes in the back, so I was in the passenger seat. I think my boyfriend was even dozing off a little bit when the driver started complimenting me and asking about my boyfriend. It was still fine, nothing too weird, and I was just trying to talk to be good company. As we moved on, I started to feel a bit uncomfortable, but I didn't let anything on and only told my boyfriend that we should find truck drivers from our country to make the last part of our trip in one go. I translated this to English immediately because the truck driver became agitated and suspicious of what I was saying. I explained that we were really tired and our plan was to find our truck drivers before he had to take a long break so that we could continue traveling without interruption. We stopped for a short break at a gas station, and my boyfriend decided he was going to look for another truck driver in the parking lot, leaving me with this guy alone. Damn, the truck driver came on to me real hard, and I was scared shitless and didn't fight back. I could feel how aroused he was, and there was no doubt about his intentions. Luckily, my boyfriend was away for just a minute. At that moment, I realized we needed to get out of this situation fast. I didn't want to say anything to my boyfriend because I was scared of how he would react, so I decided to pretend nothing had happened. I was determined to get out at the next stop. We reached a large gas station for truck drivers only and told our driver we were going to look for other drivers heading our way. During our trip to this station, this guy got in touch with another driver, saying he could also take us, maybe one at a time. Damn, I thought, now he's planning a threesome. When I was finally alone with my boyfriend, I remained calm, hinted at what had happened, and insisted that we not stay with this driver no matter what. It took us about 5 minutes to find a group of truck drivers from our country. They were having beers and cracking jokes, and 2 of them agreed to take us. I jumped with joy. We went back to the truck to get our things. The guy had already brought his friend along and was offering my boyfriend to take a shower at the gas station, saying he would pay for him for no obvious reason. He was quite persistent, and as I very well remember, he never offered it to me. Needless to say, these 2 guys were very disappointed to see us go. I still remember how they were looking at me when I was taking our backpacks from the truck. I have never told my ex-boyfriend the details. I was just lucky that we got away from that truck driver, and I think he has never realized how bad the situation was. At that time, I was playing it cool the whole time, but inside, I was shaking. I could see how desperate that truck driver was and how much he wanted to get rid of my boyfriend. I was so angry at myself for staying with him in the truck by myself, but then all of our things were there. I was also angry for not fighting him back, but it was so sudden, and I got really scared. My friend Basil and I rent a house together. He's a pretty big partier, though, and often stays out really late or even sleeps over at others' places, so a lot of nights I have to myself. This was one of those nights where Basil was out at the club or something. So, having the night alone, I brought out a couple cans of beer to our front porch and sat on the swinging bench we had set up. It was nice weather out, and with it being nearly midnight, most people were sleeping, and the neighborhood was pretty quiet. After being out for a little less than an hour, a person came walking down the street in front of the houses. He looked like a large guy and had a sweatshirt on with a hood over his head, but something was off about the way he was walking. He was very stiff, like only his legs were moving, and his whole upper half wasn't. When he got up to the part of the road my house was in front of, he stopped and looked over at me. I waited a few seconds for him to say something, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there in the middle of the road, right in front of my house, and looked at me. "Hey buddy, you need something?" He stayed quiet for a moment, then started walking up my driveway. I stood up from the bench and yelled at him to leave, but once I realized he was getting pretty close, I hurried inside and locked the door behind me. I then watched out the peephole as the guy came right up to the door. He waited for another second before pulling out something from under his sweatshirt. It was hard to see from the small view I had, but it looked like maybe a hammer or crowbar or something. Once I saw that, I knew what was likely about to happen. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, dialing 911 and trying to be quiet. I could hear the wood splintering off the door downstairs as I pleaded with the operator for help. Then there was a loud thud and silence. The broken door swaying on its hinges was the only sound. I waited anxiously, only assuming that I'd hear the guy's footsteps approaching the bedroom door at any second. But seconds turned to minutes until I heard a cop car pull into my driveway. I thought about running down to the officers, but the operator suddenly told me through the phone to stay where I was and wait for the cops to get to me. So, I sat back down. 30 seconds later, I heard one of the officers walking up the stairs, followed by them shouting and firing off a taser. The guy had been standing right outside the bedroom door, as if he was just waiting for me to open it. He was arrested and apparently was very drunk, but I have no clue who he was or why he did what he did. As far as the officers have told me, the guy wouldn't even say why he was walking down the road or what he was even doing there. All I know is if I had opened that door, it would have been the last thing I ever did. I'm an only child and grew up in a small town. My parents were hardworking and often struggled to pay the bills, so they usually worked a lot of overtime or even had multiple jobs. Because of this, I was left home alone pretty frequently. I was 13 at the time, and this night both my mom and dad were working closing shifts, so I was at home by myself after school until 10 or 11. To keep myself busy, I'd usually watch TV or go for walks in the woods behind our house. After getting home from school and having a snack, I went outside and started walking along my regular path while the sun was still out. It was a 2.5-mile trail through the woods that almost never had anyone else walking on it. Strangely though, about a mile into the walk, I saw a guy on the trail up ahead. He was sitting with his back against a tree, wearing a dark blue jacket and had a red baseball cap tilted downward, covering his eyes and most of his face. From the way he was slumped over, it almost looked like he was sleeping. So I continued walking, trying to quietly pass by him. As I got just a couple of feet away, though, he lifted his head and instantly locked eyes with me. His eyes were tired and red, and he had this disturbing frown like he was upset or something. As I passed by, he started standing up, and getting a strange feeling about him, I began walking faster, basically jogging the rest of the trail and back home. I didn't see him follow me, but I locked all the doors just in case. Again, I was only 13, and even though I was used to being home alone, I still got scared pretty easily. I stayed inside and checked the windows one last time before trying to distract myself by watching TV. Only a few minutes after turning it on, though, I heard a voice at the back door. I paused the TV and listened, hearing a man call out multiple times, repeating the word, "Hello." I stood up and looked down the main hallway. That same guy with the red cap and blue jacket was standing at the back door, almost pressing his face into it as he tried to look inside. I quickly went back around the corner, but he must have seen me because he immediately stopped calling out and instead started trying to force the door open. I just froze up in the middle of the living room, listening to the door jolt back and forth against the lock. After several attempts, though, he left. I called my parents, and they called the police, but he was never found. Having been followed home and them trying to break in, though, I can only imagine what they were trying to do to me. I've worked in manual labor my entire life, but I took a gig hauling trucks for a few years in the early 2000s. I got an offer for a package that I couldn't refuse in the way of full-time pay with part-time hours if I could meet the arrival times. I got insurance benefits, everything an employee dreams about. I got my commercial driver's license as well as a few other certifications, and found myself on the road just a month or so later. I had a lot of jobs where things got weird or just crazy, but one particular evening makes the others pale in comparison. I don't like stories with a lot of fluff, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I was on a return trip from Oregon to Minnesota. I had already made one delivery, hooked up a second, and was now technically on my way home. This was about the halfway point. Weather was great, I was feeling good and motivated. My time on that trip was well ahead of schedule, so I made sure not to push it or burn myself out. I found it super defeating to get home from a long haul and be too exhausted to enjoy it. It's always better to take a little time and stay level. I also have a bit of a heart condition, so heavy caffeine intake isn't an option for me. Most of my life has been all natural, using whatever remedy I could come up with to keep my energy up. The biggest influence was just a good diet, exercise, and a consistent sleep schedule. That means I stopped every night generally at the same time, got a good amount of rest, and that's it. Many of my trips were clocked to the very last second, but I managed to always arrive on time. I passed over the Idaho border and started gunning through Montana. Lots of beauty, but ultimately not much in the way of civilization out there. The route took me through Missoula and some more established townships. Between them, though, you'd be lucky to find a service station of any kind. Rural stretches like this always kept me on my toes as I'd heard horror stories about guys running out of gas, blowing tires, or encountering engine trouble. There isn't help for 75 miles in each direction. On top of that, some of these rural stretches don't see a lot of traffic. Some early mornings, I wouldn't see another car on the road for an hour at a time. I had my eyes set on a trucking station out in the middle of nowhere between Bozeman and Livingston. I'd roll through Bozeman around dinner time, grab a quick bite to eat, then push on towards the station. I'd let my food settle and digest a bit. After an hour of driving, I'd hit my target, pull over, and be totally ready for bed. I liked routine, structure, and having a plan. That night, everything was supposed to be simple. At first, it was. My plan was going smoothly. I got dinner, gassed up, experienced little to no traffic, and was back on the road in no time. Soon, I found my head swimming from the digestion and long day of driving. But there it was, some lights out there alongside the highway. You know exactly what I'm talking about, those big concrete pullouts on the side of interstates every 100 miles or so. They usually have a bathroom, vending machine, trash cans, everything people living on the road might need. I pulled in and found a rare sight, not a single vehicle anywhere. No one was using this rest station, and I liked that. There's a kind of security in being solo, if that makes sense. I let the truck cool down, locked everything up, then crawled into the living space in the back. My area was very simple, a bed, small table attached to the wall, and an overhead shelf to store most of my belongings. I also had a little makeshift power cell which I used to charge a portable flip DVD player that had both the player and the screen. It was one of those inventions of the 2000s that could have only been popular then. I settled in with my big blankets and pillows and watched one of my favorites, Resident Evil or Reign of Fire, an action thriller of some kind. Despite the shooting and explosions, I fell asleep just after 30 minutes. I closed the DVD player and surrendered to the darkness inside my cab. It must have only been a couple hours later when something woke me up. I couldn't place it, but I knew something jarred me. I have a habit of snoring occasionally, and when I do, I sometimes wake myself up with one of those louder rips. I thought maybe that's what happened, so I snuggled in for a few more hours of sleep. I like to hit the road before sunrise and get those extra miles in before the rest of the world wakes up. Just as I closed my eyes though, I heard it, the sound that woke me up. It wasn't a snore like I thought, but the abruptness of a cough. It came from somewhere beyond the cab, outside in the parking lot. It sounded partially muffled, maybe another trucker had pulled in and I just simply hadn't heard the rumble. Really didn't seem that likely, but I guess anything is possible, right? I wanted to be sure of what I heard, so I turned on the small overhead light. The second that flicked on, I could hear shoes slapping the asphalt and the sound of someone running away. As I listened, the footsteps faded a bit, the person was running away from my truck. They must have seen the light come on and reacted to that. But at this point, I'm now on high alert. I turned the light off so as not to give away my position within the truck. As long as it's dark, it's almost impossible to see in the depth of the sleeping cab, so I used that to my advantage. Looking out, I surveyed the parking lot and found something unusual, an older van parked across the lot, sitting angled so the broadside faced my windshield. Definitely weird, as I was 100% alone when I pulled in originally. That parking lot was empty. I tried to be reasonable though. Maybe he was walking his dog, having a smoke. Whatever the case, the person was likely a long-haul traveler just like myself. The guy was probably stretching his legs, doing a few laps of the parking lot when he accidentally woke me up. Once he saw the light, he realized that he made a mistake, then hightailed it back to his van. It really wasn't the most out-of-the-ordinary thing to happen at a truck stop. With a little apprehension, I let everything go and didn't investigate it any further. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't fall back asleep. Just as I started to drift off, I heard those footsteps again, and then what I thought sounded like someone tugging on the passenger side door handle. There was an unmistakable click, then the sway of someone stepping off the sidebar. Whoever I'd heard coughing was just trying to get inside my truck. At this point, All my alarms are going off in my head, and that structured, well-planned part of my brain is now scrambling. For whatever reason, and a lot of my friends have given me flack for it over the years, I didn't carry a gun on these truck hauls. I did have a short club that I used to check my tire pressure, and that was a great second option. At this point, I believed my best choice was to nut up and confront whoever was milling around the parking lot, let them know that my truck wasn't public property. All at once, I threw the passenger door open and clicked my flashlight on. I had a small, steady streamlight that could reach something like 30 yards, not with the puffy yellow flare of a cheap flashlight but with a white, concentrated light. I swept it back and forth, saw nothing, so I started inspecting the truck and the trailer. I saw nothing at first glance, so I hopped down and did a full lap of the rig. Still nothing, not even underneath it. Only one option left now, time to go look at that van. I swept the flashlight around and started marching up to the rear. I wanted to see the license plate before I checked it out any further. As I went to eye the back of the bumper, I brought my light up so I could see. My eyes naturally went to the license plate, which was from South Dakota, but something else caught my attention. I couldn't place it at first, but as I kept looking, it all came into focus. Below the back of the van, near the far back tire, there was a pair of boots. Someone was crouched and hiding on the other side of it. Only the toe tips poked out, but it was enough for me to see what was going on. I left the light on the boots for 10 to 20 seconds, long enough for them to realize that they were exposed. I watched in disbelief as the boots slowly shuffled backward until they were completely hidden behind the tire. My stomach soured at the whole thing. This person clearly had ill intentions, and I wanted nothing to do with them. I wanted to say something, but I found myself completely speechless. I'm not confrontational, you may have gleaned that from my lack of a firearm. I didn't want to issue a threat to someone who might have the upper hand. I just backed up until I reached my truck, hopped in, and locked the door. I figured that encounter was enough. I got out and found them, who would come up and keep messing with me. We both knew what was going on at this point, so the mystery was completely over. Just some vagrant weirdo looking to make a score. Now that he knew the truck wasn't abandoned, I hoped that he would just move on. I sat for 45 minutes, and that van never moved. I didn't see anything move, no person, no door opening or closing. It's like they were still hiding behind that rear passenger tire. As the morning went on, though, sleep came and kissed me, and I knew I needed to get at least a couple more hours of rest if I wanted to have a successful day. My eyes started to droop, and soon I was snoozing. Back when I got my first adult job after college, I moved into a smaller house with a roommate. The roommate was a girl that I went to high school with, and her and I were in the same grade. However, we weren't really friends. We both knew of each other but didn't have the same friend groups. I didn't know much about her, but somehow after college, we found ourselves living in the same city. We had been friends on Facebook or something, and because we both lived there and didn't know anybody else, we decided to try to become friends and live together. We were both female, the same age, and figured that it would work out, but I was wrong about that. At first, she seemed cool. I honestly forgot where she worked, but she had pretty normal hours like I did. Our bedrooms were the only two in the house and next to each other in the hallway. We were not best buddies or anything, but we got along good at first. However, she seemed to have sort of strange behavior. I remember noticing her leaving and coming home at all kinds of odd hours all the time. I would wake up to hearing her leaving or coming home. I was a light sleeper, and the times would be anywhere from midnight to 5 a.m. I had no idea where she would be going or why, and this happened at least several times a week. One time I brought it up, asking why she was leaving at 2 a.m. She flat out denied it and said that I must have heard the neighbor. I didn't tell her I knew it was her because I realized that whatever it was, she didn't want me to know. I didn't really think too much of it for the most part, though. But one night, several months into living there, I was out late. I was with some other friends, and I got back home at probably almost midnight. After arriving back at the house, I went inside, and all of the lights were off. I turned on some lights and also noticed that my roommate's door was open and she did not appear to be inside. I called out her name, just wondering if she was home. I figured that she was gone again when she didn't answer. Then I went into my bedroom, changed, and got in bed. I was tired, but after closing my eyes, for some reason, I had a hard time getting to sleep. I laid there for probably 20 minutes trying to rest, but it was like I wasn't tired anymore. Then suddenly I heard this noise inside of my room. I had no idea what it was. I looked up and saw my closet door opening. Then I saw my roommate walking out. It was really dark in there, but I could clearly tell that it was her. This was so strange. I had no idea what she was doing in there. I sat up and asked her what was going on. As soon as I spoke, she looked over and saw me, then she started running and darted out of my room. I stayed where I was and was just so confused. Then, probably a minute later, I heard her leaving the house out the front door. At that point, I decided that I needed to move out of there as soon as possible. For the next couple of days, I packed up my stuff. I don't know where my roommate was during this time, but she was never there when I was. She must have only been back when I was at work. Then I moved out. After that, I haven't spoken to her since. She blocked me on social media, and I still don't know why she was hiding in the closet in my room. She probably didn't expect me to get home when I did. That's why her door was open and she was in my room. She must have had to hide in my closet and waited until she thought I was sleeping to try to leave the room. I'm glad that I couldn't sleep, though, and that I noticed her. That was by far the creepiest roommate experience I've ever had. Three years ago, when I was broke, I moved to a new city for a job. This job was not the most well-paying job, but it was decent. Because I had no money going into it, I had to find a cheap place to live. I ended up going on Craigslist and finding a roommate there. I know that sounds sketchy, and the truth is that it is sketchy because the guy that I was roommates with was weird. At first, he seemed normal enough, but I never actually met him in person until I moved into the apartment. We had a 2-bedroom place right outside of the city. My roommate's name was Bellamy, and he was thin, had longer hair, and was about my age. The apartment that we got was not very nice. It was located in not the best neighborhood, and the building was old and a little bit run down. We had a living room, a small kitchen, and then a hallway where Bellamy's room was at one end. The bathroom was sort of across from Bellamy's room, and then my bedroom was at the other end of the hallway. I knew that living with Bellamy would be temporary, and as soon as I had enough money to move to a better place, I would. After meeting Bellamy and moving in, he just seemed a little bit strange. He was not that friendly, and for the most part, he stayed out of my way, which was nice, and I stayed out of his. Bellamy seemed to be a pretty private guy and didn't have much interest in being friends or anything, and that was fine. One thing he did, though, was forget to lock the main door of our apartment. There were like 5 different times where I know I locked the door, and then I would see it unlocked. I tried to talk to him about it once, and he kind of blew me off. This made me kind of mad because many times I would get up to use our only bathroom, which was right across from Bellamy's room, so I would have to walk by his door to use the bathroom. Bellamy would be in his bedroom when I was going to use the bathroom. A lot of times when I would start to approach, I would literally hear him locking his door. It was like he was afraid that I was going to try to go into his room, so he was locking it. I never once tried to enter his room. I never even knocked on his door, so it was annoying how he would always do that but seemingly forget to lock the front door of the apartment that we lived in. I would have liked to have the front door locked all the time. Luckily, though, my bedroom also had a lock on it. One night, I was sleeping but woke up in the middle of the night. The first thing that I remember after waking up is that I heard somebody right outside my bedroom door. My heart started racing, and I didn't know what to do. Whoever this person was already inside the apartment, probably because Bellamy left the door unlocked. I then heard this noise, like somebody was messing around with the lock on my door, maybe they were trying to pick it. This went on for like a minute, but luckily they didn't get in. I got my phone that was next to my bed and called the police. Then I turned on my bedroom light. When this happened, I heard whoever it was moving away from the door and seemingly back out towards the living room. I didn't leave my room until the police arrived. By then, I hadn't heard anything in a long time. I finally left my bedroom and saw that our front door was left unlocked again. The police came in and searched the place. While this was going on, Bellamy left his bedroom, apparently woken up by the motion. He said that he didn't see or hear anything. The police didn't find anybody and nothing was stolen or missing. I even remember when the police were there, Bellamy loudly said to me, "Are you sure you weren't dreaming the whole thing?" I found this comment to be a little bit rude because I knew that I wasn't. The police also heard him, and I didn't want them to think that I was just imagining the whole thing. The police advised us to keep our door locked, and then they left. After they left, I remember Bellamy asking me why I called the cops. It was like he was annoyed that I did. I said because he left the front door unlocked and somebody broke in. Bellamy claimed that he didn't leave it unlocked and said that our lock must be faulty, but I didn't believe him. I mean, somebody broke into our apartment and tried to get into my bedroom, and Bellamy just seemed annoyed by the whole thing. He didn't even seem that concerned. After that, we both went back to our rooms, and I went back to bed. I really couldn't wait to move out of there. Soon, I would have enough money saved up to do so. Several days went by and everything seemed to be going normally. Then one night, I was in my bedroom again. Now usually, I would hang out in my bedroom and then go to the bathroom and brush my teeth. Then I would return, lock my door, and go to sleep. That was my nightly routine. So, on this night, I believe it was a Friday because I didn't have work the next morning. I know that because I was staying up much later and watching YouTube videos on my phone. It was past the time that I usually went to sleep. I think it was after midnight. I was lying on my bed, and my lights were out, but my door was unlocked because I hadn't brushed my teeth yet. I remember all of a sudden seeing my bedroom door start to open. My headphones were in, so I didn't hear anything, but when I saw this, I took them out and looked to the door. After it slowly opened, I saw Bellamy entering. When he saw me staring right at him, he stopped, turned around, and then left. I yelled at him, asking what he wanted, but he quickly returned to his room. I thought this was really weird and also creepy, so I got up, brushed my teeth, then locked my door and went to bed. The next day, I asked Bellamy what he was doing, and he completely denied it. I couldn't believe it. He suggested that I was having another dream. This made me mad. But I didn't say anything. Instead, I realized that it was probably him the night I had called the police. I don't think anybody else even entered our apartment. I mean, nothing was stolen and nothing was messed up. Plus, the person went right for my room. So I started looking for a new place that same day. Within a week, I moved out. Ever since then, I haven't seen or heard from Bellamy, and I'm hoping that I never do. I was about 13 to 14 years old at the time, and it was around the 4th of July. Every year around this time, the town I grew up in would have a 4th of July fair in the center of town. It was always a great place to get together with friends without parents, which at that age is a treat. So a few of my friends and I were walking around the fair just hanging out. It was super hot that day, the middle of summer lull, and we were all in tank tops and shorts, mind you. We were still prepubescent at this point, we all blossomed a bit later. So as we stop in front of a carnival game, I turn and see this man, probably mid-30s, in a full cycling gear with sunglasses on. Not weird, there's plenty of cycling enthusiasts in our town. The thing that grabbed my attention, however, was that his hand was down his pants. Me being a naive 13-year-old girl at the time, I laughed and just thought he was adjusting his tight biker shorts or something. As we walked away, I whispered to my friends to check out the guy fixing his shorts, and they looked and also found it funny. We carried on with our day and forgot about the man. Eventually, I don't really remember who approached us specifically, but an older friend of ours told us to get on the sidewalk immediately. When we complied, she told us that the man in the biking gear had been following us around the fair. We were kinda behind a lot of the carts, so we weren't in the main part of the fair where everyone could see, and continued to have his hand down his pants, masturbating as he was following us. Someone obviously called the police and arrested the guy. I heard later that they searched his car and found porn inside and a few other suspicious items, but I never heard any more about him or who he was. My friends and I never really mentioned it after that as well. I don't think we fully grasped the situation at the time and just kind of blocked it out. I mean, still to this day, almost 10 years later, it makes me squirm when I think about it. Let's not meet again ever, creepy cyclist. This is something that happened to me when I was much younger. I believe I was about 11 or 12 during this time. I lived at home with my older brother and my parents. One of my favorite things to do after school most days was to unwind by playing some video games. I would go upstairs to my bedroom and start playing on my PlayStation 2 for a while. Sometimes, I would play all the way until it was time for dinner. So, one day I got home from school and went straight up to my bedroom to play some video games. Both my parents were still at work, and my brother was still at school. That's how things usually were for an hour or two after I got back on most days. I remember playing video games, and a little while in, I heard my brother getting home downstairs. The front door opened and closed, and I heard him walk inside. I thought nothing of it and I kept gaming. But about an hour later, I got a call from my mom. I had a home phone in my bedroom and saw through the caller ID that it was my mom's cell phone. When I answered, she told me that she was on her way to pick up my brother from his friend's house, and they would be home soon. My dad was going to pick up some food on the way home from work, and she wanted to know what I wanted. I told her whatever food it was that I was in the mood for that night. Then we said bye, and I hung up. It was only after ending the call that I realized it was strange that my brother was not home. If he was at a friend's house, then who had I heard entering our house? My heart started racing, and I had a terrible feeling. I carefully walked to my bedroom door and opened it up. I had never heard the person walking upstairs or near my bedroom. I didn't know where they went after entering the house. So, after not hearing or seeing anything, I left my bedroom. I quietly walked down the hallway and looked downstairs. I still saw nothing. Then I went down the stairs. Once there, I walked around the main level of the house looking. I did not see anybody, but when I was near the kitchen and kind of the front door, I heard a noise coming from the basement. It sounded like somebody was down there. I quickly ran away and went back upstairs to my bedroom. A short time after entering my room, I heard the front door to the house open and close again. At that point, I ran back downstairs. When I got to the front door, I saw what looked like a man walking away down the street. I didn't recognize him and only saw him for like 2 seconds. It might not have been the same guy who had been in the house, but I think it was. I then locked all the doors and called my parents, who then called the police. The door had been left unlocked for when my brother got home. I hadn't known he was going to a friend's house. Looking back, I can't believe it happened. I didn't even know I was home alone with some random guy downstairs. I'm really glad that he didn't go near my bedroom. I live in Burke County, North Carolina, in Morganton. I'm used to the quiet lifestyle that comes with living in a rural place. You get some weird characters here and there, but it's usually nothing too bad. I own a nice plot of land with my husband. My work schedule fluctuates, sometimes I work days, sometimes I work nights. This happened on a night that I was on my way home after a night shift, so it had to be like 4 a.m. My phone was almost dead. I was hungry. I was tired, and I just wanted to get some food and head home. I stopped at the gas station to get $10 worth of gas and also a packaged sandwich, which I proceeded to eat inside the gas station cafe. Some sketchy guy was eyeing me for a little until he left the building without buying anything. After eating, I went outside to fill up the gas and then got back in the car. The smell of gas was extra pungent for some reason. These roads are very dark and twisty at night, so I was driving slow, especially since I was tired after a long day of work. Then something unexpected happened. The needle on the gas gauge suddenly dropped to E, and the low gas light came on and beeped. I had no idea what was going on. I'm not a car person and I'd never run out of gas before this. Plus, the needle just suddenly dropped. I thought at first that the computer was glitching, so I pulled over and restarted the car, but the needle was still on E. I tried to continue driving, but the engine died. I started having a panic attack. I called my husband first thing, and thank God he picked up. I asked him how did my car run out of gas after I just filled up, and as I got out of the car, I smelt gasoline. I told him this, and he said it sounds like I have a leak. He told me he'd head right over and he'd call our roadside assistance company. But then I heard a car coming with no headlights, and suddenly it stopped not far behind my car. I suddenly thought to bring up that sketchy guy who was watching me at the gas station and asked my husband if there was a chance he did something to my car. My husband's tone suddenly changed to sounding more concerned and worried. He said yes, there's a chance that he may have cut my fuel line. I didn't know what that meant. All I knew was I needed to run. I took my keys out of the ignition and shut the door and locked it so that the headlights would turn off. My phone was on like 2%, so I told him to text me when he's close. I ran off the road and towards the first house I could find. I ran down the long driveway and up the property to the front door. All the lights in the house were off. I still rang the bell multiple times anyway. Eventually, a light turned on and then the door opened. A man in his 60s opened the door. He looked like he was just woken up. I asked him to let me in to hide and charge my phone. After a bit of explaining, he opened the door fully and let me in. I asked him for an iPhone charger, and he said he'd go look for one, then asked me to take a seat in the living room. I sat down, still in my nurse scrubs, feeling a mix of emotions. The man called out from the kitchen asking me if I wanted some water. I said yes, please. Little did he know, I saw his reflection in a mirror in the living room that gave visibility into the kitchen. I saw him fill a cup with water, then I know for a fact I saw him drop something into the water. He walked out of view of the mirror, but the faucet was still running. It ran for a solid 30 more seconds before he turned it off. He came back into the living room with a glass of water and handed it to me. I thanked him, and he sat down and just looked at me, then asked me to explain the situation again. I replied to him, I just really need a charger so that I could contact my husband. He said all right and went upstairs. I checked my phone, and it was on 1%. I used that remaining battery to send my current location to my husband just in case. I then smelt the glass of water, and although it didn't smell like anything, I knew he put something in it. Now I had to make the decision of whether I should leave or not. On one hand, I needed to charge my phone badly. On the other, I was 99% sure he did something to this water. I heard him walking back down the stairs, and he said he doesn't have any iPhone chargers since he has an Android. After he said this, I got up and walked straight for the door. I'm not an idiot. Once outside, I ran back down the driveway to the road. I felt like throwing up. I couldn't believe two separate potential incidents from two different men happened in one night. I crept along the side of the road behind the trees. I took out my phone and sent my updated location, and right around now was when my battery died. I waited until I saw the familiar headlights of my husband's truck. I went out waving my arms, and thank God it was him. I got inside the truck and let all my emotions out, crying to him about what I just went through. He brought us to my car, and there was no longer a car behind mine. My back window was shattered, though, and it appeared someone had gotten into the back seat, but nothing of high value was left in my car to steal anyway. My car battery was also now dead. When I told my husband about the man who tried to potentially drug me, he was so furious he wanted to go break down his door. But I told him no, let's just wait for the tow truck to come. We waited quite a while before it came. My car was towed to my dealership, where they would take the car in the next day. My husband was right. My car was vandalized, and the fuel line was cut completely. Thank God I was off the next few days because I needed some time to mentally recover from this night. The idea that twice in one night I was almost a victim of some sketchy men, I just couldn't get over. Immersed between the pines, that was the predicament I currently ended up in, an empty highway spanning miles and miles through one of the most desolate roads in the Rocky Mountains. How long had it been since I was at Jim's diner, looking at the sky gray and foreboding, obvious that a storm was on the horizon. There was that smell in the air, sulfur, between the heat of the afternoon and the sudden chill. I could even feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. Trapped on this highway, with no exit for 40 miles, no car or truck for at least 2 hours, and my bike broken down. Wonderful, I muttered, exasperated. Could today get any worse? I had run out of gas. There were some farmlands a few miles back, lost to the oncoming darkness and surrounding sea of pines. The odd feeling, beyond the sense of being completely alone, was that of truly being alone. No chirp or buzz, even howling, that would animate these mountains, beyond the roar of tires and horns, like life itself had found residence elsewhere, leaving me in this impersonation of the world I once was in. Climbing up the hill, feeling the first drops of rain hitting my leather jacket, I felt the first tinge of fear. Until the end of the hill, I saw an exit, plain as day. The name of the town was Padua, the other name was scribbled out. Padua, I thought. Beggars can't be choosers. The walk didn't take as long as I expected it would. The cut into the pines led to a town trapped in another time. Not a ghost town from the last century with broken-down ranches and general stores, but a town that looked like a postcard from the 50s. That retro look was long associated with the big bop monster movies and drive-in theaters. There was only one problem with the site: not a single soul, nor a single car, was moving throughout the town. Instead, there was only the same silence I had heard throughout the mountain highway. There wasn't much more to think about. I resolved to explore the town as it started to come more into view with each step and push. There was a gas station not too far away, a diner down the block, and, from the looks of it, a hotel in the center between the two. I should name this town Lucky Break. "Hello," I called out, standing at the gas station, my bike parked at a stall. No dust, the pumps were on but locked. Walking into the store, which was open, the lights flickered almost as a response. "Anyone here?" The store was completely packed full of food and drinks, just no worker. "Maybe he's on break," I muttered to myself, trying not to dissect the logic any further. I grabbed a protein bar and a bottle of water. It was still cold and fresh to the touch. There was a feeling that I was being watched. Maybe it was just the eerie feeling of being alone. As the doors shut behind me, I could have sworn I saw a shadow sitting at the register. When I did a double take, I found the store completely empty. Drinking the water and chewing on the bar, it had been hours since I had eaten or drunk anything. I released the trigger to let the gas pump start. There wasn't any other way I knew how to get it to work, no credit card slot, no manual pump on the outside. Must be an older job. When I finished filling up the bike, I took in the scenery and watched the clouds. The bike came to life, and I looked around, still feeling that sense of not being alone. "Oh well," I spoke aloud as I entered the empty street. I decided that, while it was only slightly drizzling, I might as well explore the town. Spanning only a few blocks, lights were on in most buildings. However, there wasn't a sign of a single human, animal, or even insect. Like a model or a set of a movie left alone, tomorrow they'd come back and start again. There were a few buildings I tried. I needed a bathroom anyway. A few cloth shops, nothing that I needed or wanted. Being on a bike limits what can be carried. Then there was a library, stacked with books. There was a theme I noticed, not thanks to the books but the periodicals. Nothing past the date of 1958. That didn't make sense. The last article read about the local football team going off to take the championship on October 21st. What happened October 22nd? There was too much to think about. The only thing that mattered was finding shelter and maybe getting a proper dinner. In all this commotion, I realized leaving the library that I still hadn't charged my phone. What was I thinking? Finding the diner I had passed before, the setup was one of those tube-like buildings that used to populate the country, slowly disappearing one by one to make way for franchises. "Hello," I left my bike in the parking lot. The rain started to pick up, nothing hard yet, but it was coming soon. Again, I began to wonder why I would even ask. At this point, I'm just going to let myself in. I found a place for my phone to charge. The outlet looked a little weird, but it fit. When the screen came on, I could have guessed as much, no signal. Looking around the empty diner with its colorful booths, counter cakes in the displays, the grill in the back, even a jukebox and cigarette dispenser, I walked up, placing a few loose quarters in both. I found myself putting "Jingle Jingle Jingle" on the jukebox, a cigarette hanging out of my mouth. I checked the back room, the grills all worked and even the ovens. Playing with the switches, I found myself even dancing to antiquated songs, singing with a sparse knowledge of the lyrics. There was a fridge full of vegetables, red meat, even a steak. Putting the steak on, I heard "The End of the World" by Skeeter Davis starting to play. The eerie song almost put the sound of complete silence in perspective. I went to summer camp a few times when I was a Boy Scout. It was usually pretty fun, especially the parts of the day we got to spend doing whatever we wanted. Nobody was actually invested in earning numeric badges unless it was for something cool, like wakeboarding. All we really cared about was messing around in the woods and swimming in the springs to beat the heat. It was a nice time just to be away from home and our parents for a week. The only thing a Boy Scout was missing was a girl to gallivant with. In the beginning, I thought I would go to summer camp every year if I could. However, things took a turn when I was 13 years old. After this trip, I left my troop and never went camping again. It was on the fourth day of summer camp, right in the middle of everything as far as responsibilities were concerned. It was a light day for me and my friends, 4 of us in all. We ran around the main common area of the campgrounds, used our allowances to buy ourselves each a souvenir knife at the general store, drank some yoo-hoos, and threw some tomahawks with the weapons guy between his classes. Eventually, 2 of us decided that we were getting tired and sweaty and just wanted to sit around in our tents until dinner time. But my closer friend Enoch and I wanted to keep it going. There was a network of trails that snaked all around the various campsites. We'd already taken the trail to the springs, so Enoch and I wanted to do a little more exploration. There were just the 2 of us, so we both had canteens full of water and snacks in our pockets, along with knives and cordage, a map, a compass, and I had a small first aid kit. We thought we were prepared for whatever we would run into out there. We didn't plan on going far either since we had to be back in a little under 3 hours for dinner. We set out from our troop's campsite with plenty of daylight left and made our way into a mosquito-infested area of woods. The canopy shaded us pretty well, and the air was humid and stifling. We wanted to see what it was like out there, but all we discovered was that the trees were a bit taller. It wasn't long before we started to make conversation over the sound of afternoon bugs, the sort of bonding you would expect to occur between 2 13-year-olds in the woods. We talked about girls mostly in the ones that we thought were ugly, so on and so forth. None of it was very tasteful, admittedly. We jokingly proposed that it was possible for us to go far enough that we would find our way into the Girl Scout section of the campgrounds, which did exist but was well separated from the Boy Scouts. Then, our surroundings started to change inexplicably. Suddenly, there was a breeze washing away the warm blanket of moist, motionless air and replacing it with cool, dry wind. Initially, this was a great relief to me and Enoch, who had been sweating profusely for hours, even in the shade. It also seemed to drive away all the mosquitoes and gnats, which was a welcome bonus. But just a few moments later, the woods quickly darkened, and the sky above us, between the branches of the canopy, went from vibrant blue to a pale gray. "Hey Enoch," I said, concerned, "I think it's about to rain." "No kidding," he agreed. More like we're about to get caught up in a thunderstorm. Should we turn back? I suggested. No, Enoch replied with confidence, looking down at his compass. The trail that we're on loops back to camp. Right now we're heading due north, which means we're right in the middle. We might as well just keep going. Well, sure, I said. Enoch seemed to be pretty confident about his navigation skills, so I let him make the decision to press on. However, the threat of being soaked to the bone put a damper on the mood, and as such, there was a lull in the conversation. We hiked on, listening for oncoming thunder and waiting to feel the first raindrop land on our heads, except it never came. The darkness that descended on us only increased, but rain never fell. Hey Enoch, I said again, even more concerned this time. Will you check the time, man? I think we might have missed dinner. Enoch looked down at his watch. No way, man. We've only been hiking 4, and then, suddenly, Enoch went silent and stopped in his tracks. What is it, man? I asked. My watch is dead, he said gravely. How is that possible? I thought you replaced the battery before going to camp. Enoch silenced me and started looking all around. You hear that? He whispered. I listened but didn't hear anything. Actually, I heard so much of nothing that it struck fear into my heart. It was totally silent, not a sound in the woods all around us. It was an unnatural quiet, devoid of any cicadas or even flies. For a minute, I peered deeper and deeper into the woods with my ears and heard only silence. Until finally, I heard singing, angelic singing, but it was so soft and quiet that it was almost inaudible but unmistakably the voice of a beautiful woman. Just by the way Enoch looked at me in that moment, wide-eyed and grinning, I knew he heard it too. Oh, it's the Girl Scouts, he exclaimed. Before I could even respond, he bolted into the woods to go after the sounds. Wait, Enoch, stop, I started to go with him, but by the time I had taken 10 steps off the trail, I realized I couldn't see well enough to go any farther. It was like the sky had fallen, darkness, like the dead of midnight, had snuffed out the light of day in merely a moment. A deep sense of dread filled my body, telling me to turn back. I backtracked the 10 steps I had taken without even turning around until I felt the flatness of the trail beneath my shoe again. At this point, all I could hear was my own breathing and heartbeat, and the singing, whoever was in the woods, growing louder and drawing near. But something was wrong. The sound no longer came from a single direction. Somehow, it was circling all around me, closing in on me. It was too loud to bear, and I felt like it was putting physical pressure on my body. I tried to cover my ears, but it was just useless. It all became a single, piercing cry. Finally, I heard a scream, a boy's scream. It cut through the cacophony and returned my surroundings to total silence, except for the echo of someone's cry for help. Enoch, I called into the woods. Come back, there was no reply. A moment later, I heard a twig snap on the trail from the direction we'd just come from. I hoped to see Enoch, but I didn't. Instead, there was an inhumane figure at the nearest bend in the trail, the shape of a tall woman, but composed of no flesh or bone whatsoever, only ominous light. As I gazed upon whatever spirit this was, it suddenly raced toward me. What I did next was pure instinct. I abandoned Enoch and ran blindly down the trail as quickly as my body could take me. I didn't stop until I spilled out into the campsite again, collapsing to the ground. When I looked up, I saw that everything was different. The sun was shining, the woods were alive with birds and bugs, and all of my friends were coming to see what was wrong with me, why I was so upset and panicky. I couldn't speak a word for hours. When I could finally tell the scoutmasters what happened, they didn't believe me. They sent a search party for Enoch, but they couldn't find a single trace of him. Even the police were never able to locate him, he simply vanished. Suspicion eventually turned to me because the story I told was so unbelievable. So, to avoid being put in an asylum, I ended up changing my official statement to losing track of him when we both went to take a piss at separate trees. I turned my back for just a minute, and then he was gone. In my worry and panic, I thought I saw something that wasn't there. But it's all lies because I know what happened. There's a nice quiet scenic creek not far from my house. I like to drive my kayak up to it every once in a while on the weekends in the summer. This one particular weekend was one of those weekends. The weather was perfect, sunny and 70s. I'd kayaked down this creek a bunch of times and never had I seen anyone else kayaking it. That's part of the reason I like it, because I'm a very reserved person and I like to do things myself, preferably with privacy. So, I set out on the kayak not far from where I'd parked my car, which is in a gravelly dirt parking area right off the road. There was one other car that pulled in a few minutes after I did, which was unusual. I'd never seen any other cars except my own here. 20 minutes into my kayaking, someone came out from the woods ahead of me, coming up on the left, and approached the edge of the water. He stopped and waved at me and smiled. He put his hands on his hips and greeted me. It seemed he had an expectation for me to stop and chat. I instantly knew I didn't like his smile, but my mother raised me to be polite to everybody, so I stopped paddling and smiled and greeted him back. There was an awkward pause where he was just nodding his head with his closed-lipped smile, and I had to break the silence by saying, "It's a beautiful day out." He nodded his head and said, "Yup," then asked where I'm from. I made something up and said, "From up north, just visiting." He clearly lacked the ability to hold any sort of conversation, and that's coming from me. I'm not the most social person myself. So, I wanted to just move along. I told him to have a great rest of his day and continued onward down the river. Never in a million years was I expecting what happened next to happen. I turned when I heard a snap of a stick or something from not far behind me. There, in the not-so-far distance, was the guy hiding behind a couple of trees, seemingly following me. I was disturbed and uncomfortable, like he was clearly trying to not be seen. I was scared to call him out in fear of how he might respond, so I pretended not to notice him and continued to kayak down. I would continue to side glance every so often to see if he was still following me, and he was. I had never wanted to see someone else in the water so much in my life. I took out my phone to try to call my dad or my brother for help, but of course, I had no cell reception out there. Still, instead of being followed and probably attacked, I decided to stop in my place, turn around, and threatened to call the police if he didn't stop following me. The man just stood in place behind another big tree, though he was clear as day there. I then decided to fake call the cops. I raised my phone in the air at the man and said, "I see you there, I'm calling them now." I then proceeded to fake a phone call, pretending like I'm talking to the police. The man started to walk away deeper into the woods. It seemed to have worked. I turned around immediately and started kayaking back up the way I came as fast as I possibly could. I would constantly look over my shoulders until I got back to where I launched the kayak. I made it safely. I checked my whole surroundings before stepping out of the water and carrying my kayak back to my car. The other car in the little parking area was still there, but I made a disturbing discovery that may have saved my life. Up until this point, everything that happened could have maybe been explained away. However, I noticed broken glass near the back of my car, and the back passenger's side window wasn't there anymore. It had been shattered. I didn't step 1 foot closer to my car. I stayed hidden in the woods and checked if I had bars now that I was closer to the road. I did, and I called 911 successfully. I reported the whole incident and the broken window, and I stated I was scared I was still being followed. Waiting for the police to arrive felt like the longest, most tense moment of my life. It dragged on far too long, but when they pulled into the dirt area, I finally came out from the woods and waved at them. I pointed to the car, and 2 police officers came out and approached the car, where they found him, the man from the woods, waiting in the back seat of my car, hiding and waiting for me to enter my car to grab me. It was beyond satisfying to see him arrested. He definitely wasn't smiling anymore. I looked at him as it almost seemed like he was avoiding looking at me as he was taken to the police car. I'm happy the man was so stupid that he thought I wouldn't notice shattered glass all over the side of my car. My name is Craig. This was in the dead of October, chilly and windy. I live in a somewhat big town. It's very poor and old, with early 18th century type buildings. A friend and I were bored one night and decided to go around at 3 a.m. I know that going out at 3 a.m. in a poor town isn't exactly smart, but we like to have our fun. We got bored of driving around blasting our music. We're both very big metal heads, and at that point, we had our own band, so we decided it would be interesting and cool to walk around a cemetery in the town behind the old town square. There's a massive cemetery. It's divided by 2 sides of a highway, both sides taking up about 20 acres of land. As I said, it's massive. We decided to check out the older part of the cemetery. This part is completely separated from the rest of the newer cemetery with an old iron fence and gate. We got to walking around and checking out the cemetery, trying to read the old moss-covered graves, taking pictures, being a little bit disrespectful, I know, but these were graves from at least a century ago, so there was no one living that would be upset by it, and I'm sure the people in the graves didn't mind too much. After about an hour of checking it out, we sat down next to a giant pecan tree in the middle of the old cemetery. That's when we heard this little girl laughing. It was really close to us. At first, I assumed maybe it was a toy left on a child's grave or something like that. I'm not one to scare easily, so I just figured it's motion activated or something like that. We are not at all easy to scare, so we both sort of laughed, pointing out that it's creepy, and just kept talking and enjoying the ambience. Then, as in all stories like this, I got the feeling of something or someone watching me. Once again, I just figured that I was letting the entire thing get into my head. Then my friend says he thinks he sees someone in the shadows of a small wooded area right next to the cemetery, of which we were really close at this point. We're both a little creeped out and decided to get up and leave. And that noise, the exact same noise, played again. When we heard leaves crunching underneath the feet of someone, that's when we booked it. We ran down the hill leading to the old part of the cemetery, down to where my car was parked. I've never run that fast in my life. It sounded like that laughing noise was following us. At that point, we both sort of just went into full fight or flight mode, going as fast as we could without thinking. The noises behind us stopped as we got to my car. I started my car and put it in drive, pulling out into the highway without looking. Luckily, no one hit us. We got down the road to the only gas station that's open at this time of night to check in the back of my car. We had both been discussing how we were scared some had been done to it. We got around to check and immediately found the back doors open. I know for a fact neither of us ever opened it. There was no reason for us to open it. I looked in the back seats to make sure nothing was there, got right back in the car, and peeled out. I'm still confused about what happened that night. I'm not sure if we both overreacted or what. All I know is that I still feel that weird feeling that something is behind you whenever I tell this story. My friends and I were very stupid when we were teenagers. I was like 16 or 17 when this happened. It was the month of October, and I wanted to do something scary in the spirit of Halloween. There's a small cemetery about 15 minutes from where I live, and when I was drunk with a couple of friends, I said we should sneak into it. I'll make up some names for my friends, Dion and Ezra. We were at Dion's house. He didn't drink ever, so when I came up with the idea, he was the one to drive us to the cemetery. Ezra and I were really the ones leading this, Dion was just along for the ride. But then again, he hadn't been drinking. Dion parked in some parking lot across the street. It was a ghost town because it was past midnight at that point. We made sure no one was around to see us as we hopped the fence into the cemetery. It wasn't exactly pitch black out, but it was slightly hard to see more than 10 feet in front of us, so we were all using our iPhone flashlights. There didn't appear to be any night security in the cemetery, so we kind of dispersed from each other. Dion seemed to be following Ezra more closely. I could still see where they were because of their flashlights. I went off a little further on my own and decided I'd start taking a creepy video. So I started recording with the lights still on, of course. I recorded a bunch of old headstones and the general eerie vibe of the cemetery at night. I didn't see Ezra and Dion anymore, so I started to go look for them, still recording. I looked at my phone screen and froze. There was a woman dressed in a white gown or a dress, I want to say, with long gray-looking hair. She was looking down at the ground. I looked up from my phone screen to look at her in person, but she was gone. I started to back away. I looked back at my phone screen, and there she was again, only now she was looking into the camera, or rather looking at me. I looked up from the phone again and could not see her once more, so I looked back down at the screen again, and there I could see her moving closer to me. I started to scream for Ezra and Dion as I sprinted away from that spot. I couldn't see their lights anywhere. They weren't answering my screams. I had a feeling they were going to try to scare me, so I ran back for the fence of the cemetery to hop it and get out. I made it to Dion's car and texted the two of them, saying they need to get out of the cemetery now. They met me at the car minutes later. We all sat in a car, and I showed them the video I took. They had the same horrified looks on their faces I did. Now that I was actually watching the whole video, I could see the moment the woman slowly lifted her head from looking at the ground to looking at me, and then she starts to move towards me. We could only see her moving for like a second or two before I start screaming in the video and running away. But the way she was moving, we could see no leg movement. It almost seemed as though she were floating to me. I had that video saved on my old iPhone 5S, but the stupid thing won't turn on. It gets stuck at the Apple logo. I don't want to reset that phone until I can get that video off of it somehow. My friends firmly believe the woman in the video was a real living person who also happened to be in the cemetery that night, but me, having been the one to actually find her and only being able to see her on my phone screen, well, let's just say I was never a believer in the paranormal until that night foreign. I've never told this story to anyone. I know I shouldn't even do so anonymously at the risk of being connected to it, but it's been eating at me for decades. It happened when I was a kid. I was about 13 years old, and it was the night of Halloween. I lived in a relatively new suburb at the time, which had been built to increase the number of homes in the small town that was growing adjacent to the freeway. It all looks very different now, but back then the area wasn't nearly as developed. Strangely, nowhere was this more obvious than the cemetery that was a few turns off the main road in what used to be the outskirts. At the time, it was mostly vacant. Not enough people had died to fill it up yet. That would change, however, as me and my two friends, who I'll protect by calling Aaron and Michael, decided we wanted to go exploring the empty graveyard instead of trick-or-treating. We knew it would get us in trouble, so we put in some effort to cover our tracks. We wore costumes and started the night by immediately stealing a few bowls of candy that were set out and mixed them all together so it would look as though we actually went trick-or-treating like our parents thought. Then we walked about a mile off the beaten path so we could get to the cemetery without being seen by the cars on the main road. This involved hopping a fence that surrounded a large drainage pond for the freeway and cutting across the banks to hop the fence again into the cemetery grounds. As we got off the residential streets, we were bathed in darkness, which meant there was almost no chance that we would be seen. We thought we were safe, but what we didn't know was that we were being followed. Once we had successfully snuck in, we stomped around and tried to scare each other for laughs. Then we found a few blank gravestones laying around next to a crypt, and we smashed them together just because we could. We took a few chunks as souvenirs. There wasn't much else for us to get up to, though. The whole place was eerily empty. We were used to seeing them filled to the brim with gravestones, but the majority of this space was just uninterrupted grass. Eventually, we got bored, but we weren't ready to leave, so we sat down against the backs of a few gravestones to avoid sitting on top of dead people. There was a view of the freeway that looked pretty cool since it was the only thing that was lit up for miles. For a moment, we were just sitting there being kids. Then it all came crashing down as we heard what sounded like a person behind us. We all jumped in fright and we turned around. We couldn't see anything, just gravestones. The ghastly wailing continued, and then it started to say our names. We shouted at it, trying to claim we weren't scared of it, but we were. We thought we were totally alone, so maybe it was a ghost that was mad at us for being there when we weren't supposed to be. We started walking towards it with small, terrified steps, hoping we would look behind one of the gravestones and see a person messing with us. All three of us were clutching broken chunks of granite as if it would help defend us from the supernatural. When we started getting closer, it seemed like we were localizing the source of the noise. That's when it said something that I wished it wouldn't every single day. For context, my friend Aaron's mother was extremely ill with cancer at the time. That's part of the reason that we were acting out by breaking into the cemetery in the first place. He was in a funk, and he was mad at the world, and he was our friend that we did stuff with. Understandably, Aaron stopped in his tracks when the voice claimed that it was the ghost of his mother. I can't imagine what was going on through his head, a lot of powerful mixed emotions that must have been a lot for a 13-year-old to handle. He shouted back, trying to cast it out, but he was already choking up. The supposed ghost of his mother dug deeper, saying that she just died a few minutes ago. Aaron said that was a lie, but the voice didn't care. It started to cry and say that because he wasn't in the neighborhood like a good boy, his father wasn't able to find him, and she died wondering where her son was and why he didn't love her enough to be there. Aaron yelled again that it wasn't true, that it couldn't be, but it struck him so badly he was failing to hold back his tears. Michael and I started trying our best to console him, not really knowing how. But then the mood changed on a dime when the unknown voice stopped crying and started laughing. Then it didn't sound like the ghost of a woman anymore, but a snickering boy. We looked over and saw someone crawling out of their hiding spot behind a gravestone. It was somebody we knew, but I can't say his name. He was a couple of years older than us, and he was a neighborhood bully. He must have seen us sneaking off and followed us so he could pull some kind of prank like this for kicks. All of Aaron's sadness turned into anger in an instant as he charged toward the bully, who was laughing so hard he didn't notice how pissed off Aaron was. Nobody expected him to do what he did next. Aaron tackled the boy to the ground and started beating on him, screaming furiously that it was way too far to joke about someone's sick mother dying. Michael and I agreed, and we hated being bullied by this kid too, so we let it happen, figuring it would teach the jerk a lesson. Unfortunately, we didn't notice before it was too late that Aaron wasn't just pounding the kid in the face with his fists, but with the chunk of gravestone he'd broken off a few minutes prior. After just a few more seconds, there was no sound or movement from the bully, no indication at all that he was still fighting back. Michael and I exchanged a worried look right before deciding that this, in fact, was going too far and we needed to stop it. We rushed over to Aaron and pulled him off the bully. As we held him back, we looked down at the other kid and saw just how badly he'd been beaten. The jagged stone had turned his face into an unrecognizable bloody mess. There were deep gashes all over his face and head. Even in the darkness, we knew. But we still waited for him to get up or to at least groan in pain. But he never did. Gradually, Aaron let go of his rage and he came to realize what he'd done. Michael and I were already stunned. He broke away from us, but then he rushed back into panic, trying to wake the kid up by shaking and yelling his name. But none of it was any good. He finally looked back at us and he asked us to say that he was just unconscious and not dead. Only one of us knew how to check. I could see that Michael was shaking as he stepped to the body and knelt down, checking for a pulse. He checked and waited, even bringing his ear down to his face to check for breathing. But unfortunately, he only confirmed the worst. Aaron had killed our neighborhood bully. After an internal silence, Aaron snapped us out of our daze. He took charge of the moment. He led us through the cover-up. We all thought about just coming clean, but we were so afraid of the repercussions. Well, Aaron was, and there was a small sick part of us that was glad that it happened, to be honest. The bully got what he deserved, to a certain extent. We did our best to think so anyways. Besides, we had no idea how to act in a situation like that, so we just listened to the orders that we heard. We dragged the body to the fence around the drainage pond and ripped the bottom of the chain-link fence out of the dirt so we could pull the body under to the other side. Then we got a gravestone and a bunch of broken chunks and threw them over, including the ones we thought were going to be souvenirs for the night. We took off his shoes and his jeans, then slid a gravestone underneath his shirt, fastening it to his chest by tying his jeans around his torso. Then we tied his shoes to his ankles and filled them with stones. Aaron then dragged the body into the pond, and he was holding it up until he was neck deep. Then he pushed it towards the center and let go. We watched it sink as Aaron turned around and came out of the water looking like a completely different person. Aaron's clothes needed to dry at least a little bit so we didn't look obviously drenched before we went back to the neighborhood, and we needed to make sure that the body wouldn't immediately float to the surface. So after throwing everything related to the killing in the pond and washing our hands of the blood, we hopped the fence and sat on the banks for a while where we couldn't be seen. It was totally silent the entire time. The bloodstains had been rinsed out of his clothes, but we would never be able to look at Aaron without seeing them. It was on our hands now too, and we had to live with that. It was hard to pretend to be a normal kid after that twisted coming-of-age moment. The disappearance was the talk of the town for days, even weeks, until the body finally floated to the surface a few weeks later and the murder was discovered. Nobody ever suspected us, but the publicity of the case going unsolved was torturous for us all, and the worst for Aaron. Michael and I were able to get back to a semblance of normal after a couple of years, but Aaron was never the same. When his mother finally died, he never talked to us again, and he never made any other friends. He kind of became the town degenerate, and nobody but Michael and I knew the real reason why. When he was 17, he ran away from home, and he's never been seen or heard from since. I work at a cemetery on the edge of my town. It's a small one, being only a few acres of land. I'd been working there for a year at the time, and I hated every minute of it. Not really because it was a cemetery, but just because it was boring. I was alone all night and sat in a small room for most of the time. There were 2 cameras set up on either side of the yard and one on the entrance of the tiny building I was in. My boss always told me that my job was to just be there, and if anything actually happens, then to call the police and let them take care of it. In the whole year before this, not a single thing happened. Again, it was a small cemetery in a small town, so not a lot of action was expected. On a Monday evening, I pulled into the parking lot and relieved my coworker from his day shift. I hadn't slept the best that day, so I brought a cup of coffee to help keep me up. For the first hour, I was sipping on my coffee and watching the cameras while also scrolling through my phone a bit. Come 1 a.m., I started to get really drowsy. I was nodding off in my chair, and the coffee wasn't really helping either. In the middle of the hour, I guess I fully fell asleep. What I think was 20 or so minutes later, I woke up to an odd sound, metal creaking behind me. I swiveled around in my chair. The door to my building was cracked open, swaying slightly from the wind outside. My heart hurt from the strike of fear it gave me. I got up and pulled the door further open, peeking my head outside and looking around. Nobody was in sight. I slammed the door firmly shut and made sure it was fully locked. It could have been a simple mistake, not fully closing the door, but it got my hair standing up. I rolled back the footage outside the building and didn't see anyone coming up to the building. At least after this, I was wide awake. I was constantly checking each camera. About 10 minutes later, I saw something move on the screen. It was the camera on the far end of the yard. Someone was walking through the cemetery. I watched as they slowly made their way past several gravestones, then stopped. I waited a few seconds before picking up the phone and dialing 911, still keeping my eyes on the screen. I spoke softly into the phone, telling the operator that I worked at the cemetery and there was a man trespassing. The woman on the phone started responding when suddenly the man sprinted through the yard and off of the screen. I let out an uncontrollable gasp, moving my eyes all around the other cameras looking for him. A second later, he appeared on the other screen, sprinting past it again, and not long after, he appeared on the screen showing the outside of the building I was in. I told the woman what was going on, that I needed to be quiet. I put the phone down and stared at the camera. It was a man who was now standing right outside the door. Then he looked around at the face of the building before locking his eyes on the camera. It made me shiver, seeing him stare at the camera as if he could see me through the screen. "Hello? Can you help me?" I heard his muffled voice from the other side of the door. Then, without even waiting for an answer, he walked around to the back of the building. There were no cameras on that side, but I could hear his footsteps in the grass. He sounded like he was walking right up against the wall. Then out of nowhere, I heard his footsteps departing quickly. My heart was racing all the way up until the police came. I thought I'd sound crazy, but they found very defined shoe prints in the grass. They followed them far off, way past the cemetery border, but lost the trail before it led anywhere else. The man's behavior was very odd, and the way he asked for help was even odder. I don't know if the door being opened earlier was somehow him, but I don't know what to believe anymore. Despite being scared shitless, I continued working and still work there. Nothing else has happened, and the man never returned, but I don't think I'll ever fall asleep at the cemetery again. It was a Memorial Day weekend, so my friend group rented a lakefront house for the weekend 3 hours away from home. It was cheap because it was in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina. It was Callista, Cara, Zelda, Mia, Cheryl, and myself. We all piled into Cheryl's truck. I was the one to find this place on Airbnb, and what was most appealing about it was the big deck with the hot tub on it that overlooked the lake. There was also a fire pit right by the water with a bunch of Adirondack chairs around it. Everything about it seemed perfect for a few days and nights of getting wasted with some friends. The Airbnb host told me that when we got to the property, there was a hidden key behind the mailbox to unlock the front driveway gate. The driveway was made of gravel and dirt, and it cut through a small opening in the woods, bringing a slight uphill to a bigger opening where the house was. Cheryl parked the truck right next to the front deck. The deck wrapped around the entire house, which was pretty cool. The first thing I did was walk to the back part of the deck and look at the view of the lake. It was very beautiful and peaceful. Too bad we were about to be blasting music and partying. Right as we were done unpacking, everyone cracked open beers, and we wasted no time letting the weekend begin. We played beer pong, cornhole, barbecued, and blasted music for hours. We were really loud because, as far as we knew, this was the only house around here. It's not like there were any nearby neighbors to complain. The phone connection out there was very spotty, so we really were just living in the moment, socializing with each other, not distracted by social media and whatnot. As it was getting darker and we were sitting by the fire pit, we all got startled when a voice came from the edge of the woods. It was some middle-aged woman with short hair. She started yelling at us to lower the music, so someone lowered the volume of the music. The woman started more or less lecturing us, saying how we out-of-towners always come here, litter in the lake, and create nothing but noise. She seemed like genuine white trash. I apologized on behalf of all of us, and one of the girls asked the woman if she lived nearby and if she could hear the music. The woman responded, still in a yell, that she couldn't even hear herself think. She didn't acknowledge the other question regarding if she lived nearby. Then, she just walked away into the woods, like literally into the dark woods. It was so strange. When we were sure she was out of earshot, we all erupted into laughter. As bizarre as the encounter was, we had to make light of it, but it also did put a slight damper on things considering we thought for sure we were far enough away from any neighboring houses to blast music and be loud. But we continued to drink, and pretty soon that concern was forgotten about, and we got loud again. Some immeasurable amount of time passed before a song ended, and it went quiet for a second, and we heard a voice calling out from the lake. We paused the music and listened, and sure enough, a voice was calling out for help in the middle of the lake. We all looked at each other nervously. I stood up and went to the water and yelled out, "Who's out there? Are you in the water?" The voice called back, "Yes, help." Adrenaline started to kick in. There was a kayak leaned up against the deck by the water with 2 sets of paddles. Cheryl and I agreed to paddle out there in an effort to save whoever was out there. We yelled out at them to keep calling out, but as we got in the water, the calls seemed to get further away no matter how deep we got into the lake. After like 5 to 10 minutes of rowing out to the complete darkness of this lake, calling out repeatedly for that man, we heard it was just utter silence. All we could see were the lights from the house sitting at the edge of the lake, and then just darkness in every other direction. It was only the sound of the light splashes of water and then screams, female screams, coming from the direction of the house. They sounded gut-wrenching, like genuine screams of danger. It sounded like more than one, at least two of the girls' screams. We immediately started paddling back, even more panicked now. The screams stopped long before we got back to the shore. We screamed out for our friends, but we checked inside and outside of the cabin, and all 4 of them were gone, vanished without a trace. We tried texting and calling them, but we had no bars, of course. Cheryl's truck was still there, so we took it and drove up the road looking for the nearest neighboring house. We found it, a similar opening in the woods that led up a hill and onto a property where we saw a house with the lights on. We went to ring the doorbell multiple times, but no one ever answered. We went to look through one of the windows in the front, and what we saw sent chills up my spine. We could see clear as day into the living room. There was a lamp on in the corner, and in the middle of the room, somewhat close to the window, was that trashy woman we saw who came and yelled at us before. She was standing still, doing nothing, just facing the window looking out at us. She had a borderline angry-looking expression. We yelled, asking for help, but when she wouldn't move, we were too creeped out to stay there and left. As we got back in the truck, about to drive to another house, my phone started vibrating. It was Mia calling me. Thank God. I picked up and asked her they were and what happened, but I could barely get a word in as Mia said there were 2 men with axes in their hands wearing masks over their heads walking towards them out of the woods, and that's why the girls screamed and they all ran away down the road. One of them was currently on the phone with 911, and they were waiting. It was out in the woods right on the side of the road. It wasn't long after that the call disconnected, and I wasn't able to reach him again. So we waited on the side of the road, not far from the house. When we finally saw flashing lights coming down the road, we waved them down and asked them to help us find our friends first. We drove up the road until we saw our friends come out from the woods, waving their hands. We scooped them up and followed the police back to the house. Once there, we collected all of our belongings as Mia and the girls frantically recounted what they had just gone through. Oddly enough, the Airbnb was not broken into, and none of our stuff was taken. There was no sign of any men with axes. We also told the police about the cries for help in the lake, which I believe prompted a search team to come to the scene. By then, we were already long gone from that place. We never looked back. After much persistence and battling with Airbnb and the host, we got our money back for the stay, well, most of it. None of us could ever figure out this situation, like if it was all a trap. If the calls for help from the lake were linked with the men approaching the house with the axes, and if that woman was also affiliated somehow with this. Was it just to scare us out of there, or were they really going to attack us? I don't know, and I don't care. I just don't do remote places anymore after this, and I know the girls won't either. My younger brother and I have childhood friends that go to the beach with our moms for Memorial Day weekend every year. We've been doing this since before my younger brother was born. On our trip about 2 years ago, we had just arrived at the condo complex that we were staying at and had begun to unpack. We were on the first floor, so only 2 flights of stairs to get to our condo. There was some kind of construction happening a few floors above us, so there were trucks and workers. We had finally finished unpacking our stuff, and we were headed down to the beach when I remembered that I left my purse in the car. My mom gave me the keys, and they went down to the beach while I went to the car to grab my purse. But while I was getting it, an old pickup truck pulled into the parking lot, and an older man got out. He had paint on his shorts, so I figured he was a worker. But me, at the time being a teenage semi-petite girl, kept my eye on him. I got my purse, locked the car, and then started heading back to the stairs. I should also mention that the stairs were outside, open for everyone to see. The man started following me up the stairs, but he was several steps behind me. I figured he was headed up to the construction area, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Nevertheless, I started walking faster, and when I glanced behind me, the man was only 2 steps behind. This is when I really started to panic. I only had car keys and a purse on me, and I didn't know the layout of the condo yet. Where was the knife block? Was the door to the beach open? I finally reached the door to the condo, ran inside, and tried to close it behind me. The man was at the door and was trying to force it open as I was trying to force it closed. I finally just tried to run for it, hoping the sliding door to the balcony and beach was open. Luckily, my mom and my friend were still inside because they forgot to bring sunscreen down. I ran behind them, and the man just stood in the doorway. "Can we help you?" my mom asked. The man awkwardly smiled and mumbled something about looking for supplies and abruptly closed the door. After I calmed down, we went back to the parking lot, and his car was gone. I'm confident that the man thought I was going to be alone in that condo with him, and I don't like to think about what could have happened if my mom and friend weren't there. Up until about a year ago, I worked at a grocery chain. I was, and still am, a working college student. My availability was only 6 p.m. to closing, which in this case was midnight. It wasn't my favorite job. I dealt with a lot of annoying customers and coworkers, one of whom once broke into my locker and put a used tampon in the pocket of my apron, but that's a whole different story. My job was walking distance from where I lived, which made it really convenient since I didn't have a car. One Friday night, I was closing as usual with my supervisor, and we were running later than we usually did. My supervisor and I finally got the remaining customers out of the store, clocked out, and left. I left before my supervisor and began walking home. After a long, frustrating day of annoying customers, it felt great to just walk through the fresh winter air. I spent a few minutes shuffling through my phone's playlist to find a song to walk home to. I had made my way down the main road, careful not to slip on any of the ice. One thing that's really important to know about me is that I'm a very anxious person, and while it's definitely a problem most of the time, it does help make me constantly aware of my surroundings. That's when I saw an approaching car slowing down on the deserted main road, and I automatically went on high alert. It was a black car that came to a slow stop against the sidewalk I was on, about 10 feet behind me. I immediately clutched my phone in my hand and brought it out of my pocket. If there wasn't any ice covering the sidewalk and my feet didn't hurt, I probably would have run. Instead, I opted to try and pretend that I wasn't afraid, which I don't think worked because I picked up my pace after the car stopped. It was then that I heard a man's voice call out to me. "Hey, it's cold out here. You want a ride?" the man said. I kept walking away from him up the street, pretending I didn't hear him and just hoping he would go away. It didn't work. A few moments later, I heard the car tires crushing the ice on the road and then turned around to see what he was doing. He was now driving with the car in reverse. When he caught up to me, he had rolled down the passenger seat window some more. He was a black man, maybe in his mid to late 30s. He looked at me and I stopped, prompting him to stop his car as well. "Hey, let me give you a ride," he said through the car window. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be polite because even though I was scared, I tried to be rational. All he did was offer a girl a ride home who was walking in the cold at night. Also, with the possibility of him being a kidnapper or a rapist, it was really best not to piss him off on the empty street. "No thank you," I said politely but firmly that I hesitated for a second. I was trying to figure out what to say that would get him to leave me alone away which street I lived on. "I'm okay," I insisted. "Thanks, though." As I finished thanking him, I started walking again, now putting both headphones in with the song paused. It was more of a way to signal that I was done talking to him. He didn't say anything, but I knew that he was watching me walk away. I felt relieved when I got a few more feet away from his car and heard the sound of his tires driving away. Unfortunately, the situation was only getting worse. As I started walking past the entrance of a car dealership, I saw the same car making a U-turn in the middle of the street out of the corner of my eye. When I turned slightly, he pulled up to the sidewalk yet again, this time a few feet in front of me. The man then opened the driver's seat door and got out of the car. It was at that point I was actually afraid I wouldn't make it home that night. He looked at me with this weird expression on his face. He had this really focused look while trying to look casual. It's really hard to describe. He started walking up to me. This kind of situation had never happened to me before, but I always thought of dangerous hypothetical situations in my head. I guess thinking about those situations prepared me to an extent because before I even realized it, my phone was already against my ear like I was on the phone with someone, even though I wasn't. When he came closer to me, he saw my phone in my hand and must have realized someone could know where I am right now, or I could be calling 911. That's the only explanation I can think of because when he looked at my phone, his demeanor totally changed. He stopped in his tracks with a worried look on his face and then asked me, "Oh, are you on the phone with someone right now?" I replied, looking at him with my phone still against my face and my other hand casually in my pocket. Without saying anything else, the man immediately turned around, got back in his car, and then started to drive up the street. I walked slowly at first, letting some distance grow between us, but as soon as I felt safer, I walked up the street as fast as I could without slipping. I frantically tried to call my dad, who I thought was home at the time. He didn't pick up. I then tried to call my sister and my fiancé. I didn't feel like I was in danger anymore, but my adrenaline was through the roof and I wanted to hear from someone who would make me feel better. I gave up calling after I couldn't get in touch with anyone and just kept walking. I was finally getting ready to turn onto another street when I passed an empty parking lot and saw the same man leaning against his car looking over at me. "Hey," was all he said in a flat tone when I walked by. At this point, I was completely freaked out. I didn't have my phone out anymore, so I couldn't pretend I was talking to someone again, and I was also significantly closer to my house. If he decided to get into his car and follow me, there wasn't any detour I could take to try and lose him. I was now on the verge of tears, and that's when I decided to call 911. I called 911 and told them the situation. The officer on the other line stayed on the phone with me until I got into my house. After that, an officer came to my house and asked me a bunch of questions about the man. He also asked me about his car and where I last saw him. All of the details were either too vague or I didn't remember. He said that he would at least patrol the area for him. I'm not really sure if he actually did or not, but it made me feel better at the time. From that point, I needed a ride to and from work every shift until I got my schedule changed to day shifts. Just a few weeks later, the college semester ended and I was planning on skipping a semester anyway. That experience only reinforced my decision. The more I think about that situation, the more I realize how lucky I was. I was in the perfect position to be taken, but I actually used some quick thinking that really de-escalated the situation. I moved in with my fiancée, and now I have a pocket knife and pepper spray for whenever I walk home at night from my new job. It's something to remember. If you haven't called 911, if you don't have anything to defend yourself against someone, either let someone know where you are or pretend that they know where you are. It can potentially save your life. This happened when I was a young child, maybe around 7 years old. My parents had me late. My two older siblings are both at least 10 years older than me. I was woken up in the middle of the night by a commotion downstairs. It was my parents. I cracked my door open and heard them freaking out about something, though I wasn't sure what it was. I went to the stairway and stood at the top, calling down, "Mom, Dad." My mom came to the bottom of the stairs and said to me, "Go back to bed." I listened without asking any questions. I could tell they were stressed about something, though. I tried to go back to sleep when I heard the front door downstairs slam shut, followed by dead silence. I presumed they had left the house, but wasn't sure why. Either way, I listened to my mom and went back to sleep. I woke up again to sounds downstairs. It was the sound of the front door closing and then footsteps, but no talking. Naturally, I assumed they were back home and just being quiet so they wouldn't wake me up. I heard occasional steps and thuds from downstairs, drawers and cabinets being opened and closed, and I thought for sure I heard the fridge opening too. I thought it was my older brother Jethro. He's 10 years older than me and was already driving at the time, so him getting home late and rummaging through the fridge wasn't abnormal at all. These are all things I was telling myself, logical explanations for what I was hearing. Eventually, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, getting louder and closer until they reached the top and made their way to my door. My door quietly and slowly opened. I didn't sit up or move, I just had my eyes open, facing the door as I was still lying down. There weren't any lights on outside of my room, so whoever was walking around was doing so in the dark. All I saw was a black mass at my doorway, resembling the shape of someone's head. I said every name, starting from Jethro to Mom to Dad, then I just asked, "Who's there?" They didn't reply, they just closed the door. I was left there, confused but mildly creeped out. I heard footsteps going downstairs. I was convinced it was my dad, now just coming to check on me after getting home, though I wasn't sure why he was ignoring me. I didn't hear anything from downstairs for a while. Curiosity got the better of me, and I went downstairs in the dark. I kept all the lights off as I approached the kitchen and froze at the doorway, noticing a tall figure standing right in the middle of the kitchen. I said, "Dad," assuming it was him based on the size of the person. A deep voice said, "Go back upstairs." I ran back up the stairs to my room, closed the door, and jumped under the covers. All I was thinking was why my dad's voice sounded like that. The reality of a stranger being in the house didn't dawn on my innocent little mind until a little later when I heard the front door opening and a commotion from downstairs again, voices of my parents. I went to the top of the stairway again and was shocked to see I was still awake. I asked what happened, and they told me that Jethro had a little accident but was going to be fine. I found out a month later that he had gotten into a car accident, driving in conditions he shouldn't have been driving in. My parents had gotten a call from the hospital and rushed to see him first thing, leaving me to sleep. I asked my dad if he had come in my room before, and that was when I learned that they had been gone for hours. My mom started freaking out, yelling at my dad because he had neglected to lock the door when they rushed out of the house. Me telling my parents about the person at my bedroom door and in the kitchen caused my dad to search the house with his gun and my mom to call the police. The last thing I remember was being asked by a police officer to give my story. My parents tell me they felt like morons having to explain to the cops that they left me alone and left the door unlocked. I don't think anything of value was stolen, even though whoever broke into the house clearly didn't have intentions of harming me. Having a complete stranger in your house is already a terrifying ordeal. Now imagine going through that at 7 years old. When I was just 9, we moved to a new house in a different town. I was entering a new elementary school as a 5th grader, which is always tough starting out. It was a bit awkward, as all the kids already knew each other, and I was just some random kid entering the scene. In my elementary school, you were made to sit with the kids from your class during lunch. I remember it being really awkward the first few days. Kids are extremely judgmental around that age, and I was judged as the new kid, making it more difficult to make new friends. But during those initial days of being the new kid on the block, I actually met a few of the kids on the block. One of the kids was Roy, who went to a private school, so we went to different schools. We met while I was biking down the street, and he asked if I had just moved into the house on the corner. We started hanging out from there. Then, a few days later, I met Hank. Hank actually rang the bell one day and asked my parents for me. I was confused when my parents called me to the door and introduced me to him. He said he lived down the block and wanted to know if I liked video games. Of course, I said yes, and he invited me over to his house to play Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas. I didn't have that game but really wanted it, so I said yes. We walked to his house, which was literally the corner house at the opposite end of the block. Right away, I felt like the house looked less nice than every other house on the block. It was the same size as most, but it just looked run down and not taken care of. There was no grass. The front yard was just 2 big patches of dirt with a walkway cutting through them to the front door. We entered the house, and it was equally disheveled inside. It was like a house of hoarders, with boxes and junk everywhere in every room. He led us to the basement, which smelled like 15 cats lived down there. Weirdly enough, there didn't seem to be any pets. The basement was a pigsty. It may have been the messiest room in the house. We sat on this brown leather couch placed right in front of the TV. He had a GameCube and PS2. He booted up San Andreas, and we played the 2-player mode. It was actually fun, and in that moment, I thought I was going to like Hank and would want to be friends with him. Eventually, I wanted to go home, so I said I had to go. He seemed really disappointed, like he wanted to keep hanging out. We'd already been playing for like 2 hours, so I just wanted to go home. He followed me halfway home until I said, "See you later," basically saying in a friendly way, "All right, go away now." That was the first warning sign. I remember this kid Hank who lived down the block from me. One day, he rang my doorbell and asked if I could come out and play. I recall thinking he was a bit of a weirdo, but I didn't find it concerning just yet. The next day, Hank rang the doorbell again and asked my parents if I could come play. This time, we played GameCube in my room for about an hour. To be honest, I was starting to not really like him. I felt like he was weird and made me uncomfortable with how physically close he got to me. The next day after school, he rang the bell again. I wasn't really in the mood, so I told my mom to tell him I didn't feel good. He left, and I was relieved. I would rather hang out with my friend Roy, honestly, because I just liked him more. That same day, I rode my bike up to Roy's house to see if he could hang out. He was down, so we started riding our bikes further up the block. This was a mistake because as we passed Hank's house, he came outside onto his front stoop as if he were waiting by the window. It was weird, and it was also awkward because I had just had my mom tell him I was sick before. As we passed, I told Roy that I had hung out with that kid and that I felt like he was slightly weird. Roy was shocked that I had hung out with him, saying that whole family was crazy. I found out from Roy that Hank was actually a couple of years older than me. He was 12. From this point on, I decided to steer clear of him. The next weekend, Hank came to our door again, asking for me. I had told my mom before this already to tell him I'm not home if he came back, so she did that. But late that night, I woke up to my window completely open and a cool breeze blowing into the room. It was a chilly September night, so I most definitely left the window closed originally. Waking up to an unexpected breeze made me question who could have done that. Then I felt something poke my foot, and I screamed. I looked at the foot of my bed and saw Hank. He told me to be quiet, it's just him. Before I could even ask what he was doing in my room, he explained that his parents were fighting and he wanted to sleep with me. He climbed through my window. I was in shock. I told him to get out, and he pleaded with me to let him sleep in bed with me. Again, I told him to get out. Watching him turn and climb out of my window was a disturbing scene. I closed the window and locked it, and then went straight to my parents to wake them up and tell them. They couldn't believe it. The next day, my parents both went down the block to talk to Hank's parents, and when they came back, they said it didn't go well. Hank's crazy mom screamed and laughed in my parents' faces, taking no accountability for her son's actions. I'm sure my parents didn't want to get police involved because Hank was just a kid. But however many nights later, I woke up to knocks at my window. I had my blinds closed, but I knew for a fact it was Hank. I didn't answer the knocks, which went on and on for like 5 minutes. I even heard an attempt at opening the window. I was actually scared. I remember my heart racing. Eventually, the knock stopped. I went to tell my parents, and they told me to just ignore it. I think they weren't as threatened because, like I said before, Hank was just a kid. It was probably a few days later when Roy and I, along with another kid I made friends with from school, were biking from my house down the block, and when we passed Hank's house, I saw him run to the window as we passed. He just watched. I told my friends about what happened, and they found it hilarious. One of my friends made a comment about how he sounds like someone who would live in a gross house like that. That night, for the final time, I woke up to a sound in my room. It was the sound of my window being shattered. I screamed as I saw Hank climbing through the window through the closed blinds. I ran to my parents' room and woke them up. By this point, Hank was already back outside. My dad went outside and chased him all the way back to his house, with Hank making it back inside before my dad could catch up to him. My dad pounded on the door until Hank's parents opened up, and my dad must have said something right because he somehow managed to convince Hank's parents to pay for the window if he didn't involve the police. They ended up paying whatever it cost to fix the window, and I never heard from Hank again. Though I did see him once or twice in front of his house the next couple of years while in the car passing his house. That family eventually ended up moving somewhere else, thankfully. I think there's a chance Hank was looking to do something crazy, like murder me or at the very least attack me, just because he saw me hanging with other kids when I didn't want to be his friend. I mean, what else would he do after shattering my window with something and climbing inside? I'm scared to wonder what kind of person Hank grew up to be. As a child growing up in a small town nestled among dense woods, I often found myself drawn to the mysterious allure of the forest. But what I encountered there on one fateful day would haunt me for years to come. It was a warm summer afternoon, and my friends and I had decided to explore the woods behind our neighborhood. Armed with nothing but our youthful curiosity and a sense of adventure, we ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, eager to uncover its secrets. As we wandered among the towering trees and tangled undergrowth, a sense of unease began to creep over me. The air grew still, and the sounds of bird song and rustling leaves were replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to hang heavy in the air. Ignoring my growing sense of dread, I pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers that seemed to echo through the trees. But as we reached a clearing in the forest, the source of the whispers became clear. A dilapidated old house hidden among the trees like a forgotten relic of the past. As we approached the house, a chill ran down my spine, and I felt a wave of terror wash over me. The air was thick with a sense of malevolence, and the shadows seemed to dance with a life of their own. With trembling hands, I pushed open the creaking door and stepped into the darkness beyond. What I found inside would stay with me for the rest of my life. A room filled with decaying furniture and cobweb-covered relics of a bygone era. But it was what lay at the center of the room that filled me with terror. A child's doll, its eyes wide with a look of pure malevolence. And as I stared into those lifeless eyes, I felt a presence watching me from the shadows. A presence that seemed to hunger for something far more sinister than mere flesh and blood. With a cry of terror, I fled from the house, my friends close behind me. But even as we ran, I could still hear the whispers echoing through the woods, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked within. To this day, I cannot shake the feeling that something evil dwells within those woods, something ancient and malevolent that preys on the innocent and the unsuspecting. And though I have long since left that small town behind, the memory of that day will haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our reality. The New York City subway system is a scary place. I've been an MTA worker for 7 years, and nothing really surprises me anymore. When friends and family ask if I have any stories, though, there is one that stands out among the rest, one that I can't explain. This happened to me about 2 years into the job, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was pretty acclimated to everything at that point, and things had become routine. I was stationed in Brooklyn at the time, and I was doing some routine maintenance in High Street Station. There wasn't a soul on the platform. It was actually kind of eerie. You're used to these subway stations overflowing with people, so seeing them empty and almost deserted looking was a strange adjustment to make. I hadn't seen a person on the platform in hours, and it was dead silent except for the buzz of the lights and the occasional passing train. Out of nowhere, I heard a clang from somewhere down the track. It startled me so badly that I dropped my mop in shock. The sound wasn't something I was used to hearing. The best way I could describe it to you is that sound that a rock would make if it had been dropped on a metal rail. I stopped what I was doing and looked into the tunnel, listening for other noises. After a while, I concluded that whatever I heard had either been caused by an animal or a falling piece of cement. After all, these stations were pretty old. I went back to work, not thinking too much about the sound. About 10 minutes later, the same sound shook me from my concentration. Only this time, it was probably about twice as loud. This time, I actually became a little concerned, dare I say, scared. Was it really possible that 2 chunks of the ceiling had fallen in the span of 10 minutes? I put down my supplies and walked over to the tunnel entrance, trying to be quiet. I peered into the darkness and couldn't really see anything. I debated whether or not it was a good idea to call out into the tunnel and ultimately decided against it. I still figured it was nothing, but after the initial fear had worn off, I was more confused than anything. I kept trying to think of things that could make a sound like that, not once, but twice. It was especially bizarre since the second sound was louder. I tried to keep my mind off the sounds and went back to work, finding a good rhythm again. I was almost done with my work on this platform and was pleased that I'd get to leave this weird station soon. As I was wrapping things up, I heard something that gave me the chills. A child's voice called out for help from inside the tunnel, and he sounded like he was in distress. I instantly stopped what I was doing and made my way over to the edge of the platform. I hesitated for a few seconds before deciding that a child in anguish wasn't something my moral conscience would allow me to ignore. I walked down the steps leading onto the tracks and waited for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I shouted into the tunnel, asking the kid if he was okay. No response. That's weird, I thought, starting to feel nervous about this encounter. Just then, the kid's voice rang out again, repeating his call for help. I yelled back, asking him if he could hear me. He responded, yes, and I asked where specifically he was. There was a brief moment of silence before he just said, in front of you. Just keep walking. I really didn't want to but couldn't just leave some helpless kid all alone on those tracks. It was dangerous. I began walking forward when something dawned on me. I yelled into the darkness one more time, this time asking the kid what was wrong. An uncomfortable pause again before the kid responded, just keep walking. I didn't like that. This whole thing was off. My eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, and I was able to slightly make out what was in front of me. There actually was what looked like the shadow of a kid just up the tracks, but there was something else that almost made me scream in fear, another shadow, this one much taller, obviously an adult. My blood ran cold, and I stopped in place. This wasn't happening to me. As slowly as I could, I turned around and made my way back to the platform. Luckily, I wasn't chased on the way back. The kid shouted, "Wait, where are you going?" once I reached the platform, but I wasn't sticking around another second. I made my way up the stairs and called the police as soon as I got cell service. I told them everything, and police were swarming the platform in a matter of minutes. I waited to see what they turned up. After about 30 minutes of searching, they did find something chilling. There was a single kid's shoe just lying in the tunnel, which the police hypothesized could have signified a struggle. After hours more of searching and scouring every available database for missing children, we were told we'd receive a call if anything ever came up. It was concluded that whoever had been down there, though, had hidden somewhere in the tunnels. I have no idea what to think of this experience. This is the best theory I can come up with. Some psycho kidnapped a child and forced him to yell for help in an attempt to lure some unsuspecting Good Samaritan into a trap. Or hell, maybe it's their own kid who they're raising to also be a psycho. I can't think of any other reasonable explanation besides this one. But if I'm right, I can only imagine what that kid must be going through. Me and my 3 friends were in New York around Christmas time. We didn't finally decide to leave until about maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. We got on the first train that we could catch, and as expected, it was empty. We were pretty sobered up by then. Then there was a sudden commotion in the next car over. We had peeped through the glass in between the cars, and there were two hooded men, or maybe teenagers, standing obnoxiously close to a woman sitting in one of the seats who was screaming for help. I suggested that we go over and kick their asses, but as me and a buddy got a closer look, we saw they were armed with handguns. I pushed all my friends to get to the next car over, away from the armed men. I took a look back and saw one of the men pointing at us before starting to follow. We ran through at least 3 different cars with the men following us before the train finally stopped at the next station. We all booked it through the old station to the nearest place we could hide. I got separated from my friends, so I went to hide behind a garbage can. I could hear my chaser's shoes hitting the tiled floors, so I knew I had no time to find a better hiding spot. I peeked through the opening at the top of the bin. I could get a better look at them now. One was black, the other was Indian, and they were both really young looking. I was sure they were only trying to rob us until I heard one of them say, "If you find them, kill them." I hope you understand why I almost gave away my position in reaction to hearing this, with a gasp and almost pulling the garbage bin down with me as I returned to cover it. I consider it a miracle neither of them caught me. They left the area. I took notice that they didn't have their guns drawn at that moment. I ran in the opposite direction of the two and quickly caught my friends who were waving me over from behind a large pole. I took cover with them behind another pole not far from that one, and we waited for as long as we thought necessary. The big shock to the story, though, was when we caught a glimpse of the woman from the train, who we thought was being threatened by the two men, walking over in the direction of the men and then calling something along the lines of, "Where are they? Don't tell me you didn't get them." The two men reappeared from beyond a corner, walking over to the woman. The rest of what they said was too low to pick up on. They walked back down the stairs to the platforms and, as we could guess, waited for another train to run their trap again. At the very least, we called the police and reported what was going on, but I have no idea if they were ever caught. This is narrated from the perspective of a female. This happened a few years ago in Rome, Italy. I was walking alone along the street that leads to the train station. It was around 2 p.m. on a working day, so almost practically no one was around. There were not many shops either on that street, and the few that existed were closed. A man was walking in my same direction just a few meters ahead of me. Casually, he turned back and noticed me. It was one of those instinctive reactions that you cannot conceal. His face said it all. He was roughly 6 foot tall and well built, not exactly the body structure you would like to see such a face on. His eyes openly said, "I've been to jail and I'm highly likely to go back again." He went along his way ahead of me and then turned again a couple more times, slowing down his pace. In a few moments, the situation was reversed. I was walking in front of him now. I didn't turn around, it was useless, I knew he was following me. I didn't hurry up, I just pretended I didn't notice him. I was listening to the radio on my smartphone with earbuds in and just simply kept on doing it. But you can imagine just how much I was panicking on the inside, all alone on the street with a 6-foot-tall criminal walking after me. I kept walking, struggling to the very last bit of my soul, acting as if nothing was happening, while desperately searching for an escape out of the situation. Then, after a few more minutes like this, I saw two men talking vivaciously outside of their shop. I seized the occasion and stopped right after them, pretending to scroll up and down on my phone. With the tail of my eye, though, I kept glancing beyond the two men, and I was right because after a few moments I saw him stretching his neck trying to spot me. He saw I had stopped and he was leaning against the wall near the two other men. He then turned back and went away. I'm pretty sure that I must have had a guardian angel that day who sent those two men and placed them at the right time and right place. Nothing else happened, but only because I was extremely lucky. To all the ladies out there, never take for granted that you're safe just because you're in broad daylight. And never give in to fear. So recently, I had an experience while I was at a friend's house alone, watching his dog, that inspired me to do another Home Alone themed video. I spent so much time reading stories of people's horrific experiences that I forget these things could happen to me too. In a bit of a different fashion, I'll tell that experience I had after the viewer submitted stories at the end of the video. A more positive experience I would also like to talk about is my experience with Scentbird, a fragrance subscription service that allows you to choose new designer fragrances to try out every month at an affordable price. You get to try the first fragrance from Scentbird for only $8, and your next month will be only $16.95. The vials are cheaper than a lot of the rollerballs or travel sizes you'll find elsewhere. Scentbird is a great solution for beginners in fragrance looking to experiment with certain scents. Scentbird allows you to try different designer fragrances from brands like Prada, Gucci, and Versace with a 30-day supply of any fragrance you choose. This way, if you're just getting into building your fragrance collection, you can test out what you like and what you don't without having to purchase a full bottle. Through Scentbird, I found my favorite scents, Eros Flame by Versace, which mixes Italian lemon, pink pepper, and vetiver for a classier scent, and Cross River Gorilla by Sanctuary for a more casual scent. So if you're looking to start your own collection, head on over to Scentbird by scanning my QR code using code 55nightmare to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Growing up, I was raised in rural Michigan. There was hardly anything to do. If you like staring at trees and crops and lots of alone time, that was the place to be. I got out of there as soon as I got a car and enough money to move. I'm not a nature hater or anything, but I'd pick being by a big city any day. My parents don't own that property anymore, they sold it 5 years ago. But to describe it, it was a 3-acre property. The house itself was pretty big, and there was a storage building out back. I was 13 when this happened. My parents would leave me alone often at this age. They trusted me because I matured at a young age and I had responsibilities on the property. It was a weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room when suddenly, a loud metallic bang came from outside somewhere in the yard. I right away ran to every window I could to look outside to see if I could see something, and I didn't see anything until I got to the window looking out the storage building out back. The door to it was completely open. I went immediately to grab the rifle from the closet and go outside. I made my presence known, shouting, "Who's in there?" to no avail. When I got to the door, I made it known I had a gun before looking inside. There was a bunch of stuff in there, from the sit-down mower to the quad to infinite little lawn care items. Someone could have been hiding behind any of that stuff. Even as a kid, I didn't scare easily, but at that moment, I got really unsettled. So I closed the door to the building and went back inside the house. I locked the door and then sat at the window for the longest time, watching the storage building, expecting the door to open at any second. That door was heavy and impossible to just open by itself. It was simply a fact that someone came and opened it. Whether they were still inside of the building, I wasn't sure. I decided to go call my dad and ask his opinion. I went to the kitchen to the landline phone and called my dad's cell phone. He didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail. This was back when you'd still have to leave someone a voicemail because texting wasn't mainstream. After that, I went back to sitting next to the window, but now I put on a TV show in the background to make this less monotonous. I took the phone with me. I was probably about to give up when I heard creaks from upstairs. My heart was now in my throat. I had to ask myself the big question, was I working myself up or was someone here? I had a serious guard dog mentality. Even if I didn't love that place, I saw it as mine, my family's. I had to protect it, but I was in over my head. I grabbed the rifle again and walked upstairs. I didn't say anything. Calling out would only make a potential intruder know that I heard them. I made it to the top of the stairs and I turned on the light for the upstairs hallway. There were 5 doors to open, all of them closed. 4 led to bedrooms, 1 led to the bathroom. Each door had a decently large crack underneath that would allow you to see looking out the crack under the door where the creak in the ceiling came from the side of the house my parents' bedroom was on. I got down on my knees and looked under the crack of the door. I saw 2 bare feet facing the other side of the door. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. The reality of the situation just became so much more real, and I realized I wasn't ready to threaten or, God forbid, shoot someone. I got up and quickly went downstairs, hiding in the bathroom to call my dad. He still didn't pick up. I left another voicemail and then called again and again. He never picked up. He must have had his phone set down somewhere. I finally called 911, as I should have done right away, and I whispered into the phone the whole time, detailing exactly what was taking place. I was told to sit tight in the bathroom and not say a word. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and then they approached the bathroom door as if whoever it was somehow knew I went straight to the bathroom. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and there was a brief pause before a deep voice said, "What's up, kid?" I still remember the voice and those words so vividly. If I heard that voice today, I'd still recognize it immediately. I almost wanted to cry, that's how scared I was. I disobeyed what the operator told me and spoke. I said loud and clear, "I'm on the phone with the cops right now, and I have a gun." I put the operator on speaker as she was asking me if everything was okay. The man attempted to open the door, and when he realized it was locked, I heard him walk away. I heard the footsteps fade to silence, and then the sound of a door slamming. It was the sound of the back door, I'm sure. I breathed a sigh of relief, and from there on, I waited for the police to arrive. When they did, I felt like £1,000,000 had just lifted off my shoulders. After a thorough inspection of the house, inside and out, confirming that the man was gone, they asked if there was anywhere else I could stay that night, and I said yes, my uncle's house. We contacted my uncle, who came and spoke with the police, then he took me back to his place. The thing that haunts me the most is that it was my fault. I could have prevented this. I left the door unlocked as I went to the storage building to investigate. Clearly, that's when the man simply walked right into the house. Even with a rifle in my hands, I didn't feel safe at all. It was truly the most horrific experience of my life. This happened to me just a bit over a year ago. I'm 24 and have a townhouse in the suburbs. I live alone, which for me gets really boring, so I try to have friends over whenever I can. My closest friends come a couple of times a week and sometimes even sleep over to escape their parents' houses. I didn't have any plans this night, but I had plans for the next day with my friend Adam, who was supposed to be coming over to have a movie night. So I really was just trying to get this night over with and looking forward to the next day. I went to bed early, like 9:15. In the middle of the night, I woke up. I looked at my nightstand and saw it was 2 a.m., but the way I woke up was odd. My heart was pounding for some reason, and my brain was very alert and aware, like something was happening. I thought maybe I had just woken up from a nightmare or something until I heard a click from downstairs. I sat up. A door slowly screeched open, and I could hear someone's footsteps entering my home. Although terrified, I thought this had to be Adam or one of my other friends, as they all had keys to my house in case they needed somewhere to stay. I got up from my bed and walked over to the door, opening it and stepping into the hallway. Adam, no one responded. I waited in the hallway for what felt like forever, but then a bright light suddenly flickered on, lighting up the whole downstairs. A second later, soft chattering noise came from the living room. Whoever it was had turned on the TV. For a moment, I felt relief, thinking it was definitely one of my friends who had one too many drinks. I went down the stairs and into the living room and felt my whole body turn ice cold in an instant. Some random man was sitting on my couch, looking at the TV screen. He looked maybe 50 years old with patchy long black hair and dirty clothes. As I stared at him in fear, he glanced over at me and showed a crooked smile, then waved his hand as if to invite me over to the couch. I turned around and sprinted right out the front door. I banged on my neighbor's door until they let me in and called the police. By the time they made it, though, he was gone, no trace of him at all. What's worse is the police didn't take it all that seriously, suggesting it was probably just some harmless homeless man wanting a place to sleep. The way I see it, everything points to otherwise. He picked the lock on my door, sat on my couch, and turned on the TV. Then the sick man smiled at me and invited me over to the couch. I think he may have been a stalker or something, and now I find it hard to even sleep at night when I'm alone, thinking that there's a chance that I'm not really alone.